"Did it resist?" the captain asked. "It's a male, and as you already guessed, it's sentient, so no, he didn't resist," replied the ship's veterinarian, a Shalkoth named Ginter from Vree. Captain Antictoon rolled his eyes. He forgave the woman for her poor attitude. Her race of graceful, two-armed, four-legged ungulates were a law-abiding sort of people. They could never be comfortable in the exotic animal and slave trade, even when their job was only to keep the merchandise alive and in good health. It was fortuitous, then, that she didn't have much of a choice, being merchandise herself. That wasn't to say that she was for sale, only that she wouldn't be for sale until a better veterinarian came along. A tiny whelp like that, he wouldn't have stood much chance. "He must be smarter than he looks," the captain said with a chuckle. "Be grateful to it. Since you don't need to patch it up, you can have the rest of the day to yourself, unless something come up." The short fur on her back, brown laced with white, lowered a bit. He wasn't used to seeing her without her hackles up at all times. He wondered if it meant he was going soft. He'd have to extend her hours tomorrow to make up for it. "There is something you should know about him," she added before turning to leave, her tone brighter than normal. "He seems like a nice young man, but I think he could have done more harm than you suspect had he resisted. He's heavily muscled, much more so than even a high-grav world would require, and he's a carnivore." That gave the captain pause. Carnivorous species were a rarity in the universe, and sentient ones were even rarer still. In fact, he couldn't think of a single intelligent species that routinely chose to eat the flesh of other creatures, except for one. Glancing to the deck plates beneath his broad hooves, he thought immediately of the lithe predator lurking in its cell deep in the bowels of his vessel. A night beast from a Class 11 death world. Its sentience was highly debatable. Captain Antictoon ran his thick tongue over his blunt teeth. He didn't think this hairless whelp was anything like that at all. "That's not possible," he said. "Our newest guest, what did he call himself?" "Human," said the vet, "named Stephen. The human has herbivore teeth. I don't see how he could possibly be a carnivore." Up close, he did not display his teeth much, but when he did, I noticed a set of fangs. Very, very small. Almost like the rest of his teeth. "But there," she pointed to the space between her incisors and molars, 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom. Little fangs. Really? He didn't believe her. "What else?" "Don't tell me you didn't notice the way it stares. Its 2 eyes. How do they make you feel?" "Deeply, instinctively fearful. Creeped out might be a better word. The thing was tiny, chest high. And when I was trying to figure out what to feed it," the Ginter continued, "I was shocked to discover that fully 1/2 of the rations in its craft, by calorie content, were comprised of animal protein." She looked sick. He could sympathize. It was one thing to talk about eating flesh in an academic sense, but to actually have to see an animal's carcass dressed for consumption up close, disgusting. "Point taken," he said. "I'll be careful around it." That meant he'd be armed and wouldn't hesitate to shoot it. Novelties like a new species were worth money, but not that much. Not enough to risk his life. He might even just kill it for fun. Every time he went on vacation, he spent more money than the creature was probably worth on more pointless and less satisfying pursuits. "There is another thing to be wary of," said Anticton, thinking aloud. "If he has a significant amount of musculature he doesn't need, he might be some kind of super soldier, engineered to be that way." "Maybe," said the vet. "There's no way for me to confirm or refute that, but it is certainly a possibility. So we have a carnivorous super soldier locked a bunk, not even a cell, let alone a reinforced cell. That's just fucking great." Add that to the night beast caged in the bilge, and it's a wonder why we all aren't dead 10 times over already. Well, in fairness, Steven seems really nice, said the vet. Maybe make them fight, chuckled the ship's executive officer. He had walked in to begin his shift while the captain and Ginter had been speaking. He smiled. Maybe. Night beasts, night stalkers, night terrors, the people of the night. Putting one in the same room as anyone, even a possible super soldier, meant sentencing him or her to die. Those nocturnal hunters were the stuff of nightmares and horror vids. Purely carnivorous, they could eat plant matter like any normal race, but would become blind, start to wither away, and eventually die off without flesh to supplement it. They were small compared to most beings, but incredibly strong and moved faster than the eye could track. With a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth, claws up to 8 centimeters long on their feet, and a kick powerful enough to take the head off a massive ice-walking Kent, they were near-perfect land predators. The night beasts hailed from Nyx, a high-gravity Class 11 death world far out on the northern galactic rim, and thankfully not anywhere else. Calling them sentient was a matter of debate. They had no technology to monitor. No one had dared step foot on their world long enough to study them peacefully, and those that were taken by force tended to be less than cooperative. Indeed, no less than 3 ships had had their crews slaughtered to a being after poaching a live night beast. In 2 of the cases, where scans showed only the creature alive aboard, the ships were railgunned into oblivion just to be on the safe side. The insurance companies would have much rather written them off as a total loss than risked recovering them. The 3rd case had been different. The ship had been recovered in orbit around Nyx, with a single escape pod missing and nothing but dead bodies aboard. Logs indicated that the creature had gotten loose when the ship was some 20,000 light-years away, warping space at full speed for its home port. Curiously, in order to make the ship reverse course, the emergency lockdown had to have been somehow overridden and the ship's AI reprogrammed. That's not to say no study whatsoever had been done on the things. Solitary specimens had been killed, collected and studied, but there was only so much a carcass could tell scientists. From the necropsies, they said their brains seemed capable of intelligent thought, but theory and practice were often very different. There was no way of knowing for sure, but AIs tasked with decrypting their language from 1 or 2 illicit probes seemed to think they were capable. But the recordings of the escape incidents on all 3 of those vessels played back nothing more than inarticulate screams of rage, untranslatable gibberish, and demands for intercourse. Intercourse this, intercourse that, intercourse you, and so on, even as they tore throats out with bare hands and disemboweled stomachs with clawed bare feet. These were, of course, blatant mistranslations, despite AI protestations to the contrary. Since the most recent incident years ago, Antiktun hadn't heard of anyone else illegally visiting the planet, let alone claiming one of the beasts. It could have been that they were simply successful and no one heard about it, but he doubted it. Then 2 standard weeks ago, he and his crew of mostly willing servants had been offered more credits than he had seen outside a lottery drawing for one of the monstrosities alive and in good condition. Having a veterinarian who couldn't refuse to work had been a gift from the 5 Lords of Heaven. He had agreed to procure a night beast for a very noble buyer, a member of the idle rich, interested in exotic animals for his menagerie. The pay would be enormous and included capture tools, medical equipment like tranquilizers, and a translator for his vet to implant, and retrofitting his ship to hold the thing before the venture had even begun. The translator was almost funny, with the thing not so expensive and hazardous to implant. The buyer had insisted that if worst came to worst, they should try to reason with, rather than kill it, and lose what credits he had already invested. The easy part was acquiring it. It had been off on a solo night hunt somewhere on the plains of Nyx's broken surface when they found it. It only took one dart of the specially developed drug used to tranquilize, though it was so powerful that it could have killed off his entire crew and all his merchandise, were it divided up evenly between them. The being had only 4 appendages, smooth skin with soft lavender tone, and had covered itself in skins that weren't its own. A length of jet-black fur swept back from where it attached to the top of its head and ran down to where its lower appendages met its torso. The 2 razor-sharp claws were present on its feet, each almost a decimeter long, with a third tiny vestigial claw on the outsides. Its 3 fingers on each hand were as blunt as any sentience. It was a large specimen for its kind at 175 centimeters and incredibly dense with heavy muscles. 4 men had to carry it onto a levitation pallet and then on into its hardened composite cage, which itself was inside a heavily reinforced cargo hold in the belly of his ship. So far, the creature had killed only 3 of his crewmen. As far as Captain Anticton was concerned, that was already an acceptable return on investment. Fewer people to share the prize, and he got to learn who among his men was dumb enough to approach the docile-looking creature during feedings, despite being specifically told not to do so. He had hoped to limit the amount of flesh the thing consumed in order to keep it in a weakened state, but that wasn't going to happen now. It hadn't even finished with the first corpse before it killed the other 2 crewmen. They had tried to pull their already dead friend from its cage. Instead, they only ended up joining him inside. How a 1.5 meter wide, 2.5 meter tall Torotan male could fit between the 10-centimeter wide gaps in the bars was one of the mysteries of nature. It went to show that if one pulled hard enough, anything was possible. The captain wasn't worried. The night beast ate 3 meals per night cycle, as best as he could tell. They would eventually recover the all-wayward crewman as it threw the finished bones from its cage. It had tried to kill a 4th and 5th time, but only managed to take a tentacle off one crewman and shatter another's upper hip. They hadn't gotten close to it, no. Vid footage proved that. The thing had thrown the thigh bones of the consumed crewmen at their compatriots with deadly force and accuracy. He hadn't known it could do that. Quick-witted observers erected a force field between the cage and the entrance to the hold just in time to prevent lethal follow-up projectiles. Not once, since it had been here, had it done anything but roar and scream. He had tried to talk to it a few times but got nowhere. His conversations always ended the same way, with him having to blast it with cold water, hard enough to kill a man just to shut it up. It rarely worked at first, but when he did it for long enough, it usually just ended up accepting its fate, silently gasping for air, half drowned in the corner of its cell as the water pounded it. He didn't do that more than a few times. It's not that he felt sorry for it, or didn't feel like getting vengeance for his crew, although he could not care less. It was just that he had better things to do than torture a stupid beast. No, he would definitely not be putting this human anywhere within reach of this thing. The snuff vids of the dismemberment would be valuable, sure, but perhaps not as valuable as a slave from an uncharted world. Those like Steven were totally off record, with no one to come looking for them, and nowhere to escape to. Some of the less reputable slave buyers would pay top credit for the likes of him. That, and he didn't feel inclined to give the night beast yet another week's worth of hearty meals. The captain caught Ginter's eye as she frowned at the XO's notion. Apparently, she didn't like the idea of staging animal fights for fun and profit either, but probably for reasons like morality and empathy. No, I don't think I'm going to feed Steven to the night beast. Not today, anyway. Probably. Turning to his XO, Aniktun said, "Tell me, Mashi, you were part of the tracking and recovery team. Where is this thing from?" That's the question of the hour, said the other man, using a set of grasping tentacles to rub his proboscis. He may have been part of a convoy, fell out of some massive group warp bubble, and became lost. His ship has a warp field generator of its own, but it's small and crude. Tikkikikirik in engineering looked at the computer too, to try and find out where it came from, but even with the AI helping, she says it's totally bricked. We think that's what caused him to be stranded in the first place. This ship is powered by antimatter. What? Bellowed the captain. Once we found out, we jettisoned it. Thanks the gods and lords. The captain shook his head in disbelief. That's just insane. So wait a minute. If it has a warp drive and is powered by antimatter of all things, why would you jump to the conclusion that it was part of a convoy? It's the only thing that makes sense, Mashi explained. The maximum range of its craft with a full containment field was about 400 light-years. 40% of its containment had been expended, so... I take it there are no habitable world within 160 light-years. You're quick with math, sir, and no. The captain rubbed his furrowed brow and sighed. So it is possible that it will be missed. That's not good news. Maybe they'll just chalk it up to the hazards of driveless warp travel, the XO reasoned. And even if they do come looking, if there's a whole group of these things trying to get somewhere at once, then it must be pretty important, so I doubt they'll start right away. I've got a super predator and possible super soldier on my ship. The human was probably part of some alien invasion force heading for one of the fringe territories. His ship looked exactly like an orbital drop pod with a warp field generator attached, doesn't it? There was some evidence that it was a multi-staged craft, yes. The drive section may have been designed to be discarded in order to allow planetary entry of the capsule. But there is the question of why it would travel using a convoy's warp bubble when it has a perfectly good drive of its own, which it won't use, and then discard before planetfall. Could be standardization of design, but I really doubt that. But if that's not the case, then we're back to the question of range, he huffed. And? He lifted his snout from his hand where it had been buried in frustration. And there were no weapons aboard his craft, said Meshi, though he was wearing a surprisingly strong set of armor. It appears to impervious to vacuum, radiation, heat, cold, small arms fire, large arms fire, poisonous atmospheres and hostile wildlife, among other things. The thing is tough, but flexible. His people have that kind of technology? Not really, no, the XO explained, gesturing a tentacle in the negative. Not in the sense that you mean. It's not terribly advanced. Any of the galactic races could make something like that. They just couldn't make use of it. It took 4 of us just to drag it to the cargo hold. The captain's expression went flat. And he was wearing it. Yes, he was. In here? Antiktun asked, pointing to the deck. Not out on some extravehicular excursion? Yes, in here. The XO pulled his proboscis tightly shut, the equivalent of pursing his lips. It seems that he didn't like where this conversation was going either. A thought occurred to the captain. Then just how in the 7 hells of Borogon did you even get him out of it? Oh, we asked him to remove it. Asked? Yes, he's very nice. I don't give a shit how nice he is. Mashi hastened to interrupt. Sir, I don't think he knows he's been abducted into slavery. That was just plain dumb. His assessment of this being's race fell a few notches. On the other hand, it was entirely possible that this genetic freak was not representative of its people. In fact, it was entirely likely he wasn't. The more he thought about it, the more it made sense. If this was a super soldier on its way to war, the thing had only to sit in its pod, land, and fight. It didn't need to be very smart, which might have contributed to why its computer was destroyed, explained how it couldn't find its way back, and explained why it didn't know it was a piece of merchandise. Heck, the thing was probably so dumb that its people wouldn't have even bothered to give it a gun until after it had landed and had safe direction in which to point it. It was probably programmed to be compliant and take orders, which was why it seemed get along well with everyone. "One last thing before I go, sir," the vet said meekly. He had forgotten that Ginter was even standing there. It looks similar to, to what? To, she stuttered softly. "Spit it out," he said impatiently, motioning for her to continue. "That thing," she whispered, pointing to the deck below her feet. The captain and XO each sucked in a breath of air. He hadn't thought about it, but the more he did, the more the captain realized she was right. They were both bipedal tetrapods, for one. It was an efficient but inherently unstable design, suited for organisms that were either on the move or at rest and nowhere in between. They were both mostly bald, for another. Their heads were differently shaped, but not nearly as much as any two other races might have been. The coloration was different. This human was a pale mottled cream color, and night beasts generally were anywhere from light blue to purple to jet black. They were the same general height from heel to scalp, though the human might have been taller and bulkier, actually. And then there were their eyes. Forward-facing, like gun barrels aimed right at you, bright and dangerous. He hoped the humans didn't glow at night like the beasts did. The thought sent a chill down his spine. On the other hand, comparing the two felt just plain stupid. Engineered soldier or not, Stephen was one step above a friendly pet and came from a people with adequate technology. If this were a true case of convergent evolution, his people would also have to have been from a Class 11 death world almost exactly like Nick's. That simply couldn't be, because death worlds could not produce true sentience, only feral monstrosities. The captain rolled his eyes and sighed internally. He would still perform his due diligence and try his best to determine if this thing posed any real risks, even if he was highly skeptical. "XO, is it safe to talk to, the human?" he asked. "I think so," said Mashi, with Ginter nodding in agreement. "His translator is working great now, and I was chatting with him for a bit. Told him I had to lock him in his room for operational security reasons. He didn't have the clearance to be wandering about. I think he bought it. After all we've learned of him, I wouldn't let slip that he's anything other than a guest. He might not be as compliant." The captain thought a moment. "Ginter, your evening is cancelled. You'll start developing poisons and sedatives to use on this thing immediately. Airborne, but harmless to everyone else if possible. Go now." The woman nodded and slowly trotted off the bridge, even her hoofbeats sounding dejected. "I'm going to go have a chat with Stephen before I retire for the evening," said Captain Anticton. With that, he stood from his chair and left without another word. The captain pulled up the one chair in the cell and took a seat. Across from him, their guest lounged on his padded bunk. It was meant to be uncomfortably small, but with him it seemed decadently large. His unusual coverings were folded up behind him as a pillow, and a blanket covered him from his waist to his toes. His chest and arms were exposed, showing off his substantial musculature. Less than a meter of space stood between them in the padded cell. "Nice place you got here," said the human. "I stayed on a terrestrial ship once, and they've got nothing on you guys. Compared to our spacecraft, well, this ship is like a palace. How do you do it?" The captain certainly hadn't expected to be praised for the accommodations, but given its small stature and the confines of the craft they found him in, he should not have been surprised. "Well, we value our guests and strive to provide the best we can offer for them," he replied, trying his best to sound sincere. "Gods and lords, this thing was stupid. But the bunks for our crew are what you might typically find on any military or patrol spacecraft. This was a lie across the board. He had no idea what the inside of a military or a patrol craft looked like, and his quarters were 2 stories and about 100 square meters. "Wow, thank you for the guest treatment then," the human said. "And I want to thank you for rescuing me out there. I thought that module would be my tomb, buried alive in space." The captain could empathize. It was any spacer's worst nightmare. He suppressed a shudder. Really, selling this man into a life of servitude was doing him a favor. His potential buyer probably wouldn't put such a novelty to work at hard labor when he could be used as a conversation piece. He would probably spend his days entertaining and doing parlor tricks as a house slave. Not a bad way to live. Better than death by starvation in a metal pod. "Well, it was the least we could do here on the Bright Hope," he said. The ship's name was the Halcyon Harvester. "We were a few light years out, but when we picked up your warp field collapsing and saw you couldn't get it going again, well, we knew we had to help." "You can actually detect the warp bubbles of other vessels, real-time from light years away?" the human asked, sitting up a little straighter in his bunk. Had he been taller, he would have hit his head. The captain was taken aback. He definitely hadn't expected the human to have cared about something like that. He hadn't even expected him to be capable of caring about something like that. "Well, yeah," Antic-Toon replied, rubbing his chin. "How do you do it?" the smaller man asked. "Does the warp field project itself ahead of the bubble? Or maybe the compressed space causes ripples ahead of it like a stone in water?" This creature was not stupid. Not by a long shot. That sort of technology is classified," Captain Antic-Toon replied. In truth, he had no idea how the hell they did it. That was probably a question for the guys who build the sensor suite they bought. "Oh, right, like the Prime Directive," Steven said. Perhaps seeing the confusion on the captain's face, he hastened to clarify. "Humans have speculated that there might be a rule that prevents more advanced sentience from providing technology to less advanced sentience, for fear of disrupting the natural course of their development." No. That was about the stupidest thing he'd ever heard. "It's more of a security issue. We can't give away technology when we don't know how it might be used." That was a lie, of course, but much more believable than the idea that he or anyone else who wasn't an anthropologist gave a flying shit about the development of some primitives. Nothing aboard his ship couldn't be procured by anyone on the open market in a spacecraft or law enforcement supplies store. He just didn't want to admit to this human that he had no idea how the sensors worked, and this excuse played well in keeping their guest behind a locked door. "May I ask some questions about you?" Antic-Toon asked, "to get a better idea of your status?" Of course, came the quick reply. "Good." The captain made a show of pulling out a data pad and a stylus. "So, what is your profession?" "I'm an explorer," the human said with a nod, an almost universal indicator for yes. "You're not a soldier?" the captain asked. "You were wearing armor when we found you, and beneath that you wore coverings with insignia." "Oh, no," he replied. "I used to be an airman." The captain's translator supplied warrior, whose domain is aerospace, for the unusual human-speak word. That his people had a single, simple word for that was disconcerting. Still, there were plenty of harmless races with deep martial traditions. "But I'm a civilian now." Civilian became one who is not serving in the military. As if that wasn't already an assumption in their language. Again, disconcerting but not terribly unusual. "What are you exploring?" the captain asked, idly typing nonsense into his datapad. "Oh, the galaxy," said Steven. "I'm conducting humanity's first manned extrasolar spaceflight and our first manned effective FTL test. It didn't go as planned." "We kind of figured that out when we recovered you from the void," said the captain. "And those symbols on your skin covering, They remind me of some military identifications and rank I've seen a few races using. He pulled his covering from behind him, a bright orange one-piece with numerous pockets, zippers, fasteners, and insignia. Not at all. None of these are even remotely related to the military, he said. Pointing to each in turn, he explained, "This one is the government-funded explorer organization I work for, called NASA. This one is for the government that funds it, the United States of America. These are for the mission and the spacecraft that brought me here and malfunctioned, Project Pathfinder and the Victoria. This last patch with the wings means I'm a pilot, and it has my first name, Stephen, my family name, McLaren, my tribe name, Lieutenant Colonel, and my clan name, Usaf." "Okay," the captain replied. "I thought as much." So this thing really wasn't an engineered super soldier, or any kind of soldier at all, for that matter. That still left other questions. "And my suit wasn't armor," Stephen continued, folding his orange skin covering. "It's just for survival in case of a hull breach." "Were you genetically engineered?" asked the captain. "No, not at all. 100% natural." "Why?" "It's just one of those questions we have to ask. There can be concerns with unnatural biological contaminations," he said. Again, not true at all, but it sounded better than, "I need to know if I should put you in a stronger cage." The captain licked his teeth and snout. "Next question. Are you carnivorous?" For a moment the man said nothing as it drew its eyebrows together. The expression for confusion, perhaps. "You mean like eating meat?" The single word meat had been translated as flesh of a prey animal. Now that was a red flag. "Yes, that is exactly what I mean by carnivorous, although we just call," the captain used the human word meat, flesh. "We have no special words for it that provide additional context." "Right, well, no, we aren't carnivores," said the human. "Not at all. I mean, we can digest flesh if it's been laboriously prepared and heat-treated, but no one ever does it. And it's just morally wrong to kill something just to eat it. The idea of it is just disgusting. But because of its extremely high caloric density, it's sometimes artificially grown to use as emergency rations." "I see. That explains why it was in the food preparations on your craft." "I guess there was some in those meals now that you mention it," Stephen offered, scratching his face. "I just never eat that part. I mean, we're not even designed for it. Look at our teeth. The ones up front are for chopping vegetables, and the ones in back are for grinding coarse plant matter. That seemed reasonable enough." "And your eyes?" he asked. "They face forward. Binocular vision." "Oh, humans are descended from arboreal mammals," he explained. "We jumped from tree to tree, swinging on vines. We absolutely needed depth perception to be able to properly time our jumps, grab vines, and escape dangerous predators that were faster, larger, and stronger." "You lived with carnivores on your world? Ones larger and stronger than you, with, well, no offense, but with no natural defenses to protect yourself?" Well, yeah," he said slowly, scratching his face. "We got lucky, you know, evolving intelligence to avoid them. And we were pretty safe, building our tree villages high up off the ground where no predator can reach us." "You seem to have a lot of muscle mass," the captain said. He showed his own arm to the man, spreading his thick layer of feathers flat. It looked spindly next to Stephen's, though it was much longer and attached to his taller frame. "Well, it's necessary for our lifestyle," Stephen said. "I imagine you evolved from six-legged ground dweller, but we humans need the extra muscle to support our entire weight on only two legs, to climb trees, to jump from one tree to another, and to grab things and lift our entire body weight up on a single hand, if necessary. And our world has pretty high gravity compared to here, I think. I was once told that if our gravity was any higher, we could never have achieved early spaceflight with chemical rockets." "Makes sense," the captain said. How high is your gravity anyway? I don't know space units or whatever, but a meter is this long, Stephen said, indicating a height on the bulkhead. The captain made a note. And the acceleration of gravity at my planet's sea level is 9.8 of those per second, squared. Does that help? And a second is 1, 2, 3. The captain noted the tempo of the man's counting and plugged that and the other information into his datapad and waited for his ship's AI to do the calculations. Though a rough approximation, the results were staggering. 4.2 galactic standard gravities. Unbelievable. Still, that the human was strong told him nothing. They already knew that just from the weight of his environmental suit. That didn't mean that he or his people were dangerous, nor did anything else he had learned thus far, aside from some peculiarities with their language. Those types of errors were bound to crop up from time to time, and should always be taken with a lick of salt. Wars had been started over worse, and sometime better translations. You seem like a very intelligent, very reasonable, and utterly harmless being, Stephen, he told the human, and I am very glad to have rescued you. He meant that. The thing would fetch a fortune. As a nobleman's personal acrobat, he could be wonderfully entertaining to watch. Why, thank you, the other man replied with a laugh. I'm glad you rescued me too. What happens now? Oh, well, if you can tell us where you live, we can get you back home, he replied. The post-primitive explorer could never know, at least in any system Antiktun could recognize, the astronomical coordinates of its home star. It was a safe offer. Otherwise, we take you somewhere to be processed into the galactic community, and we ultimately set you up with a job. No one eats for free. Of course, the other man said, nodding, but I don't know where my world is. Antiktun was quite glad and not at all surprised to hear that. It would make things a whole lot less awkward if he didn't have to refuse to take Stephen home. Nevertheless, he would play along. That's not going to make this easy. Is there anything you can tell us about where your world is? He placed a hand on the smaller man's shoulder and gave his best comforting expression. What if I gave you a galaxy map to look at? No, that won't help. It means nothing to me, the human said, scratching its face again. Oh well, said the captain, using body language to indicate his own helplessness. The human probably wouldn't understand it, but it was a natural response. He really, honestly couldn't do anything to help him, and thankfully Stephen was perfectly willing to accept that, which felt rather oddly convenient. Are you sure you don't want to see a galaxy map? Antiktun asked, pulling one up on his datapad. I can show you where we picked you up. Well, I can certainly take a look, Stephen said as the captain turned the map on the datapad to face him, a single point clearly marked. After a moment, the human replied, No, this doesn't help at all, sorry. Do you know, maybe, the distance and direction you have travelled? Or were supposed to have travelled? The captain asked, prodding a little further. No, the other man said, shaking his head. No idea. The ship was fully automated. I was just inside it as a publicity stunt more than anything. So the human government could say, we sent a man further than ever before with this new starship engine and brought him home safely. Too bad they messed up on the second part, am I right? Indeed. The captain definitely began to feel like something just wasn't adding up. There was no way this being, as smart as it was, didn't know how far it had travelled, even if it couldn't tell the direction. There would have been planning for months for a newly advanced people's first expedition past their solar system. He would have known the distance, and probably the direction too. He would have had to have seen a galaxy map of some kind, even just a section of it. The captain could have zoomed in to a 200 light-year radius of where they found him, and Stephen should have been able to orient himself. Space was three-dimensional, but the galaxy was on a plane. Damn it. Common celestial landmarks wasn't that abstract a concept to understand. A moment, please. He told the human before turning his attention to the pad in his hand, this time not merely for the sake of appearances. The captain typed out a message to the ship's AI as quickly as he could. List all the habitable worlds within 200 light-years of where we picked up the human. No worlds matching that criteria exist, came the reply. He thought for a moment as a deeply unsettling feeling just barely tickled at the edges of his mind. He typed again. List all worlds that meet the following criteria: oxygen in the atmosphere, liquid water on the surface, gravity between 3 and 5 standard units, location within 200 light-years of where we found the human. One world found. RGT 9873A3. Discovered by Zertik explorers. Its name, Kritikikid Zril Yilt Isk, translates to loss of sanity in broken blue with hope abandoned. This world is not habitable, he typed. He knew damn well what the answer to that was. No. RGT 9873A3 is Class 12. Habitation is not possible. Galactic regulation prevents approach within 100 standard light-years. General quarantine is in effect. The captain blinked slowly and swallowed hard. He felt his heart thumping in his chest, pounding harder and faster with each passing second. His hands began to shake and his legs felt loose. A sickening, sinking weight grew in the pit of First's stomach. He took a deep breath, blinked again, and turned his datapad off. He wanted the screen locked if the inevitable came out of nowhere. His sidearm weighed heavily at his side. He dare not even look at it. It would only get him killed faster. Life-harboring worlds were graded on a scale for habitability to sentient life. A Class 1 world was a perfect garden world. Class 2 worlds might have chilly weather. His own world was considered rather austere, good for developing a tough and hardy people. It was Class 5. Class 6 worlds were tough places that few visited. Some of the fiercest warrior peoples came from them. They got worse as the numbers went up. There was only one race participating in the galactic community from a Class 8 world, and most people avoided them at all costs. From there, they became even harsher and more hazardous to sentient life, all the way up to Class 10 worlds, which were considered uninhabitable. Deathworlds. Sentience did not, could not, come from a death world. Of course, just because something had never happened before didn't mean it could never happen. He just wished it hadn't happened on his ship. The habitation scale for temperate planets was pretty linear from 1 to 10. It was supposed to end there. But at some point, scientists noticed that there were worlds which went to such great lengths to exterminate all life that visited that they far surpassed even Class 10. Learned minds developed an extended scale, and each step in that scale was exponentially more deadly than the previous one. Class 11 worlds like Nyx, home of the night beasts, were almost a joke. A 1 to 10 scale turned up to 11. Sue. As for Class 12, well, he hadn't heard of such a thing until this very moment, when it had suddenly stopped being funny. "Is something wrong?" the creature asked. "Keep it talking, damn it," his mind pleaded with his body, willing his tongue to move and his lips to part. "No, not at all," the captain said, clasping his hands together in an effort to get them to stop shaking. He had an idea, half-formed and conceived in terror, but an idea nonetheless. Carefully, he turned his datapad back on. He had to type much slower. His fingers kept missing the correct spots, even on second and third tries. He typed with 2, then 3 digits tightly pressed together to lessen their shaking. This time his message was to Ginter, the ship's vet. "Have you completed the drug yet?" A few moments later came a long reply. "No. We've been testing different things on the blood and tissue samples, But nothing seems to work, and even if it did, we probably wouldn't be able to manufacture enough aboard for it to matter. What about the night beast tranquilizer? He typed. Might work. The two are similar. High metabolic rate, blood based on iron-carrying oxygen, other things. Or it might do nothing at all. She was damn right they were similar. But if it didn't work, how many doses do we have left? Only 2. If the human is compliant, it only makes sense to save them in case we need them for her. He let out a slow breath of air, closed his eyes, and concentrated. She was right, of course. This thing, less than a meter from him, was compliant for the moment. Pointing a weapon like a dart gun at it would almost certainly trigger it to kill. Unlike a night beast, there was no possible way a creature as smart and advanced as this would not know what a gun was, and the ship was too small to allow it to be shot from the relative safety of a great distance. In these confines, he had no doubt that the thing could kill or disarm, literally an attacker faster than anyone aboard could even pull a trigger. And all that was assuming the night beast sedative could even work. He could also forget locking it in its cabin. For one, it could probably beat down the thin door without much trouble. For another, that would only postpone the problem. It would eventually find out that it was taken by a slave ship. If the night beasts were any indication, Deathworlders could not just accept that fact, regardless of the circumstances or conditions. When it would find out, well, he could maybe hope it would be after finding a buyer and making a sale, but Anticton couldn't be certain. Until then, it would be like having an unexploded warhead rolling around in storage. Or worse, a primitive Class 11 would just kill everyone aboard, steal his ship, and escape home. An advanced Class 12, not even Anticton's family was safe. 7 hells, the thing would probably take his ship, infiltrate his homeworld, find a way blow it up, and then escape home. Anticton had to deal with this now. So the drugs were a complete waste. Honestly, had the veterinarian been watching vids this entire time? Couldn't she appreciate how potentially dangerous this thing was? He needed another idea, something he could actually use. He might be able to think of a way to fool it, to take advantage of its current willingness to cooperate in order to eliminate it as a threat. That meant a battle of wits with a being whose race had intelligence as its only natural weapon. An intelligence which allowed them to evolve on, survive on, thrive on, and probably, like most sentients, dominate on its homeworld. And that homeworld was a death world. They were all going to die painfully. "I agree with your assessment, thank you," he typed to Ginter, wondering if it would be his last message. Better to go out with some sense of satisfaction. "Before tomorrow, I need you clean out the waste chutes in all the slave quarters." Yes, all of them. Despite his almost complete inability to think of anything beyond getting the hells out of there, one more idea pressed its way into his forebrain only because he had already been toying with the notion earlier. He just had to calm himself and maintain enough control to carry it out. It wasn't going to be pretty, but it was probably the only thing Anticton could do to keep himself, his ship, and most of his merchandise in one piece. If the night beast somehow died, it was only a financial loss. He would be in debt to his investor, maybe sold into slavery if he had to default, but he'd be alive. He might even be able to buy his way out of it eventually. On the other hand, if the human died, he would build a shrine to the 5 Lords of Heaven. Regardless of the outcome, he saw no other choice. "I want to give you a tour of the ship," he smoothly told the creature. "How does that sound?" "Yeah, sure," said the thing. The captain swallowed his sigh of relief. Together they walked from deck to deck and room to room, the captain explaining briefly what each part of the ship was used for. He had to make most of it up, as he wasn't too clear on where his crew did what they did, or why, or how they did it. For their part, the crew were thankfully silent as the odd pair walked about, knowing better than to ask questions. Either that, or they were too put off by the rumours of the human that were doubtlessly already spreading. Though he showed the crew quarters, the captain made sure to avoid the standard slave cells amidships. That would have raised too many questions. As for the special slave cell, they were going to visit that one now. "I notice there are dozens of different species represented here," said the cheerful human as they walked. "I talked to your executive officer about it earlier. It's wonderful, you know, a whole galactic community up here just waiting for humanity to join." The creature seemed so earnest to Anticton, but at the same time he couldn't help feeling like it was onto his ruse and was implying a veiled threat. He could imagine it smiling as it happily slaughtered its way through every living thing aboard, all the while saying how much it wanted to meet his whole community. "Oh yes, there are more than a few races aboard," the captain agreed. "We cannot wait for a people as nice as you to join us either. In fact, as a representative of your people, I think it's extremely important that you meet all of the races of the galactic community. I can't do much about the ones we don't have aboard here. How many are there? Other races in the galaxy?" The captain's pace staggered. Was it normal for this creature's people to interrupt, or was it trying to throw him off? "Well, I don't know for sure," he replied slowly. "What about on this ship?" 26 different races, I believe," he replied, though the numbers change so frequently. In truth, he had no idea, but the thing had said he'd seen dozens aboard, so... The human nodded, and they continued on their way. "As I was saying, it will be important when you return to your kind to have a fully interacted with as many different races of people as possible. There is someone special I want you to meet. How is your night vision?" the captain asked, opening a door to a darkened room at the base of a large ramp. Captain Anticton held his breath. The thing's next answer would doom him or save him. "Not good," he said. "Why?" He thanked every god, lord, and demon he could think of. "Because we're going in here to say hello," he said, gesturing for the human to enter the pitch-black cargo hold. As the human entered, Anticton remained a pace behind. "It's dark in here because she's nocturnal. She won't mind being woken up to meet you, though. No, not at all. Let me find a light switch. 1 second. Where is it? Maybe over here." The cargo bay door slammed shut in front of him with a reverberating thud, trapping the human on the other side with the night beast. Erinis awoke with a start. The takers were back, she was sure of it before she even opened her eyes. Back to inflict more misery. After they took her, the first time they came to her cell, they brought her a prisoner's ration. The hand-sized portion she supposed was meant to last a full night. They gave her a thin, pasty, foul-smelling gruel made from naught but roots and leaves. It barely filled her stomach for a time and did little else. She could probably digest 1/10 of it, perhaps. They'd stopped feeding her after that night, instead coming only to talk, then scream at her. They offered more gruel for cooperation. When she had refused to respond, they tormented her with water as freezing as a stream from the high country and more forceful than the western Paratana River. By the 3rd day she was weak and delirious with hunger. She would have killed them, had she the chance, to be sure. Not only would their behavior have warranted death were they her own kind, but these were the monsters of her childhood. Everyone in her land had been taught about the takers since the time they were children. Never travel, play, or hunt alone, they said. They will find you and steal you away, never be heard from again. If you're lucky, they said, they will kill you before they take you, and only your body will be lost. If they killed you in the sky, your immortal soul would be doomed to wander from star to star, searching for home. Only one person had ever gotten away from them, and Arenis was no Marchioness Captain General Ilmanok. She remembered seeing her orations as a young girl and hearing all the stories. She remembered rolling her eyes, not just thinking, but knowing they were fables and tales of fancy, meant to keep children from getting lost or hurt. By the Almighty, how wrong she was. One thing she did not expect, however, was that she would have to eat her childhood monsters just to survive. That was unexpected. The worst part was how they upset her stomach, honestly, and tasted of 6 different kinds of foulness. Still, suffering from indigestion and ill humours had to be better than starving to death or going blind from lack of meat. It wasn't an ideal solution. The things were tall but terribly skinny, and most had thick layers of fur or feathers. That meant there wasn't much food to be had, perhaps enough good meat on each for 3 steak pie suppers, and from the gristle maybe another 2 blocks of head cheese or a dozen rings of black pudding. That was the best-case scenario, but quite a bit of the leftovers had started to turn. She, of course, had to dine without the benefit of a proper butcher's preparations. Part of her wondered if that made her a cannibal, but the rest of her didn't give a damn. She was mad with hunger when she accidentally killed the first one, hungrier when she ate it, and knew she would be hungry again when she killed its friends. Were they people just because they could talk? She doubted it. They didn't look like people. They looked like scared cattle or seafood that could walk. Would she have eaten a talking fish if she was hungry enough? Apparently so. On the 6th day, like every day before, someone came to yell and blast her with frozen water until her flesh was raw and torn. She realized something important in that moment. The water had pounded Arenis while she huddled like a formless mass of rotwood, pressed to the ground over the corpses of her enemies, holding their bones, skin and offal tight to her chest to stop their sustaining remnants from washing away. She knew she had become an animal, a fearsome, unintelligent beast concerned with nothing but survival. That knowledge brought her a kind of peace. They thought of her as an animal, caged her like an animal so she would stop fighting it and become an animal. She cursed them all the way to the Demon King himself, and for her troubles screamed herself hoarse in the process. She knew better than to say anything that could be remotely useful to them. Nothing could help her now, least of all dignifying them with any real response. She had trained as a home guardswoman since her 12th year, been a sapper since her 15th, and a longbowwoman since her 18th. She had studied for countless fortnights to earn those positions, and those vellum texts had etched themselves onto her mind. The first rule of being captured by the enemy was to give them nothing and tell them nothing, because they would use everything against you. And now they had woken her up to torture her yet again. After 2 whole nights and days of peace, she had begun to faintly hope they had had their fill of inflicting suffering. In the intervening nights, she had barely enough time to dry and redress her wounds with the torn remnants of her chemise. It had been too much to hope for. Holding herself, she began to shake in place, clenching her teeth and squeezing her eyes shut to hold back the tears. Arenis would not let them see her suffer. She slowly opened her eyes. Listening to their noises, she again accepted her fate. The witchfire wall between her cage and the surrounding room would let in things like water and sounds and probably arrows, but none of the same could she send outwards, nor could she be heard. "Think there's been some kind of mistake here," she could hear someone say. His voice, his real voice, not the one the imp they put in her ear used, sounded different from the others. It reminded her of barking, higher pitched than theirs, but still sounding deep to her, like a man's. She had never seen it before, but the new visitor looked almost like a proper gentleman, though his legs were too straight and his face a bit odd. He looked much more normal than the other monsters, and more approachable, more personable. If he was indeed a monster at all, and not something else entirely. Whatever it was with the takers, and she would kill it. She had no room for mercy in her heart for any of the takers or their serfs, servants, kith or kin. If the opportunity presented itself, it would die like the others and sustain her for another week at least. On the off chance that the witchfire yielded so the creature could approach, she began scraping around the floor. She would find a bone to throw from amongst her rotting friends that served as her only food and companionship. She first found a fragment of skull from the one she named Fernley, the brains scooped out days ago. They had been too fatty, but with a pleasant measure of saltiness. She threw it aside. A whole skull might have been better, but his, like the others, had been crushed when she pulled them through her cell bars. Reaching down again, she found his jaw, or beak, or something. Whatever it was, though spindly, it was large and had quite a bit more heft than the other remaining pieces. It would more than suffice to dispatch one of these feeble takers. She approached the bars slowly, as if she were stalking game, which, in a sense, she was. The strange visitor was distracted, knocking at the door to her outer room, asking to... In an instant, the witchfire's hum died and she threw. Her sudden reaction surprised even herself. She hardly expected the witchfire to actually depart, nor even realize she'd been preparing to throw. Oh well, it was what it was. Any second thoughts on the matter were pointless. Goodbye, Fernley's jawbeak. Goodbye, new visitor. One of the Empress's best archers, Arinis' aim had been true, the new visitor dead, and... Ow! Who bonked me? Arinis let out a squeak, jumping back 3 whole paces and upwards at least 2. She landed with a bang, followed by the awkward scrabbling of claws on metal as she righted herself. That wasn't supposed to happen. It definitely wasn't dead, and she'd only made it cross. It had moved so quick, she hadn't even seen the thing turn to face her, nor take up what was unmistakably a fighting stance. Unlike with every other being on this ship, some of whom were twice her height, she suddenly became aware of how much larger than her he was. Suddenly, Arinis really wanted to apologize. "Hello? Who's there?" the man demanded. He took a step back and began scanning the dark room. That fucking hurt. Right in the head, too. I think I'm bleeding, damn it. It stomped its foot onto the floor in frustration, so loud she jumped again. She could feel the vibrations moving through the ground and into her. "Human," the wall spoke. She recognized that voice. It was the warden, that evil creature, that vile thing that she wanted dead more than life itself. What it had done to her. She suppressed a shiver just thinking about it. "I'm on to you, Deathworlder," the voice continued from a raised indentation in the wall. "We know what your people are, what they're capable of. And now, you've met your match. Human from lost sanity, meet the night beast from Nyx. You may kill each other now." Human from lost sanity, meet the night beast from Nyx. You may kill each other now. No. She wasn't some night beast. Not at all. Just a woman. A farm girl, really, with a meaningless title. An unimportant woman, hardly worth mentioning, actually. Arinis silently cursed the warden as the creature, this man named Human, blindly searched for her. She tried to secret herself into a corner of her cage with as little sound as possible. It didn't work. She could see the man's eyes tracking her, honing in on her hiding spot. Like the others, she doubted it could not see without the sun, but that seemed to make little to no difference. She made almost no sound, but it could hear her moving, maybe even breathing. She felt sure of it. The damn thing came from a place called Lost Sanity, too. With a name like that, the place could have been some fantastic underworld from an epic poem where beings didn't need sight to see. For the first time in weeks, her rage had fully given way to fear. She heard her cage opening, the clockwork engines deep within cycling. At any point from the time she had arrived in this cursed dungeon until now, she would have prayed for her cell to open. Now, she fervently prayed for it to remain shut. "What the hell is a night beast?" Human asked, his eyes sightlessly shifting to the whining hinge. She gulped. It wasn't her, no, definitely not. No way. She began to wonder if one of her skeleton friends could maybe cover for her. Rudigtha, Fernley, Twin Argard, anyone? None volunteered. Traitors, all of them. "Your doom!" shouted the warden. Doom? Doom? If they fought and she actually ended up killing this man, it would be an absolute miracle. Against one of her fellow dames, strikes to the head, like the one she just delivered, would have laid them all low to a woman, if even for just a moment. That huge man hadn't even lost his footing. She was hardly his doom. A better descriptor might be more difficult than average sparring dummy. She's a carnivorous killing machine with razor-sharp teeth, massive claws, and a taste for intelligent meat. We'll see who survives. All technically true, but really. "What the fuck?" screamed Human, banging on the door with lightning-fast punches. From across the room, she could feel each impact in her bones. She didn't want to be anywhere near this creature. "You want me to fight some animal? What is this? Some kind of gladiator blood sport? Why would you do that? What? I'm a simple man, a small, defenseless herbivore. You're just going to feed me to it. Why? I'll have no chance." It was bargaining. Or it knew she was listening and hoping to lull her into complacency. Either way, she was highly skeptical. "Ha! It's not any bigger than you," said the warden. "You might stand a chance." "Jesus Christ, mountain lions aren't any bigger than me either," Human yelled back. "When I get out of here, I'll fucking kill you, slaver scum." And now she wanted to be his friend. That might have been easier said than done. Sure, she could just march right up to the gentleman, introduce herself, explain herself and her terrible mistake, and hope for the best. It might work. The second rule of being taken prisoner was to find allies and unite with your fellow prisoners around the common goals of resistance and escape. They certainly had a common enemy, and the gentleman was surely intelligent enough to see that. On the other hand, this man could be extremely dangerous, and might not even be in his right mind if the name of his homeland meant anything. Not only that, but she could clearly see and smell that she'd drawn first blood. Though she would seek his forgiveness, he need not offer it, and without it he was entitled to strike her down. And at the moment he seemed rather angry. Arenis pushed all fear and doubt aside. Only cooperation would lead to salvation. She took a deep breath and drew herself up to her full height and slowly strode toward Human. They were not going to fight for this sadist's amusement. They were going to clear this up like the lady and gentleman they were. She would first work up the courage to introduce herself to Human, and together the pair would find a way out of this mess. For the first time since being taken, she began to feel a glimmer of hope. "If you get out of here, you can come find me, Human," said the warden from the wall. "I think the beast stalking towards you right now will have something else to say about that." In a flash, it turned from the warden's voice and looked her right in the eyes. She froze. Shit! It had been playing blind. "Not if I kill it first, you son of a bark." "Wait, no, stop. My name is Arenis of Karamast, daughter of—" The world went white around her and she fell to her knees. She couldn't breathe. She had to vomit but couldn't gag. Her hands flew to her throat as she gasped for air, frantically trying to roll away from Human as the looming man stalked towards her. She hadn't even seen what had happened. He had moved so fast. It had hit her hard in the throat, either with a punch or using its hand like a knife to jab or slash. It hadn't been as effective as clawed kick might have been, but it struck faster and would be no less deadly if it happened a second time. Regaining her bearings, she began scooting backside away from the man. With one hand, she searched for bones and pulled herself along. With the other, she massaged her almost useless throat. With her legs, she used one to push herself away, holding the other aloft, but ready to kick out at Human's torso. "Please," she tried to croak, rubbing her throat, imploring the lunatic man, "Stop!" Bark off, bark, bark. It danced around her, clearly wary of her clawed foot. She struck out, barely tearing its silk tunic as it dodged. She had been taught never to hit a gentleman, but she would definitely make an exception in his case. It pushed toward her from the side, and she moved back an equal measure. It hurt to breathe, and she was fast running out of room to maneuver. She kicked again, and it dodged just as quickly. "My name, Arenis," she wheezed again, her words sounding strangled. She had to explain that she was a person, damn it, not some beast. "Daughter of Lady Jerusalka." This time the man lunged with his arm. She kicked at it and missed. She barely spotted the man's other arm as it tried to catch her foot. She rolled in place, bringing that extended foot to the ground, while her other foot spun up to take its place, tearing deeply into the man's forearm. It barked in rage. She scooted back another 2 paces. "Dame Commander," she choked. What madness had come over this thing? Did it just like killing things? In her Imperial Majesty's order, she had slid her way right into a corner. The man had planned it that way, and she had played right into it. She was just another cornered animal fighting for her life. Another lunge, another kick in response. She was ready for when he tried to catch her foot again, and kicked up with her other leg. This time, she missed. The human had caught her by the second foot. His other hand quickly grabbed her leg by the hock, seizing it firmly in place. In an instant he rolled to the ground, keeping his body on the side of her immobile leg, stopping her from kicking out with either. He fell atop her, releasing her leg as he landed. He rolled her chest first into the ground, while she alternated between elbowing his ribs and stomach and using her fists to hammer at his thighs. Setting all decency aside in desperation, she tried to grab and tear at his manhood, but he kept his hips pressed firmly against her buttocks, leaving no room to strike. She tried another tactic, pushing herself off the ground. That only made things worse. Using the gap between her body and the floor, the man wrapped one arm around her entire body, just beneath her bosom, locking her arms at her sides and crushing her torso into his. She began throwing her head backwards, fighting with every little scrap of energy and whatever tools she had left at her disposal. She felt gratified when the back of her head made contact with the man's odd nose, feeling it crushed as it made a soft crackling sound. It was odd. She had always enjoyed hand-to-hand combat. Were she not facing a certain and swift death, she might have admitted to finding the sensations of the hot-breathed gentleman holding her tightly, pressing his body into hers from behind, to be mildly concupiscent. She normally preferred her gentleman to not be so forward, however, and not quite this big. "Bark, bark, woof, bark, bark, boof," is said. The imp was gone. It had stopped translating his words, so it must not be translating hers either. That's why they couldn't understand each. The man's second arm joined the first, this time sliding up to her neck. The first hand then moved from her below her bosom to her forehead, preventing her chin from guarding her throat. With a roll, he was beneath her now, with both of them facing the ceiling. His legs snaked around hers, holding them down. He pressed in tight against her throat with his bleeding forearm and thick bicep, almost like a piece of wrought iron trying to remove her head. Her sight began flashing white again, this time starting at the edges. She could barely breathe as it was, but this was something else. An excruciating pressure built inside her skull. She was going to die in mere moments. Her soul would wander from star to star. She wanted to make peace with the Almighty in her last seconds, but she could only think of fighting. Fighting against this man-beast named human. Pointless. Sure, she was caught by surprise, but she honestly thought she would have stood a better chance. Instead, she was little more than a stupid, slashing dummy. Not even a proper sparring partner for him. Sparring. She immediately stopped all fighting and went limp, slapping his arm at her throat 3 times. Her vision was fully white now, and she could not see. She could barely feel anything of her body beyond the arm at her throat. Would it understand? This was just a translation problem, right? This man had to be intelligent, not a killer or a monster or a lunatic. Had to be. In her final fading moments, she slapped his arm slowly, firmly, deliberately 3 more times. After the 3rd time, something happened. She could barely tell that the pressure on her neck was gone and her body had been shifted gently to the floor. Something soft had been placed under her head. The gentleman was no longer pressed against her. Though blurred, her vision began to return. She stared at the ceiling and blinked, tears from her eyes. Human was crouching above her. "Bark, bark, bark, woof, okay?" it asked. "My name is Lady Arenis of Karamast," she barely managed to whisper. "Daughter of Lady Jerusalka, Dame Commander in Her Imperial Majesty's Order of the Sacred Guard, and I am not an animal." Arenis' head fell to the side as she lost consciousness. Bah! She could see the stars. The blinding lights only visible on a cloudless night. She travelled to one and held it in her hand. A beautiful crystalline incandescent light. It shifted and twisted like a candle's flame in all directions at once. She watched it twinkle for a moment before releasing it. She flew to another and held it too, examining it. It felt larger and softer, but like the other, she did not recognize it. Releasing it, the searched for one that could show her spirit the way home. None of them looked the same, not from here. She could identify no constellations at all. Not the 2 suns, not the huntress, not insect and pauper. The land looked different from the mountaintop when one only ever stood in the valley. So it was when one looked at the stars, while amongst them. She found one that felt familiar, one that just might be able to help lead her soul home to rest. Reaching out to touch it. "Hey! Hey, Arenis! Don't you fall asleep on me!" "What?" She squeaked when she saw the man kneeling above her and tried to scoot away, only to be reminded that she was still backed into a corner. She needn't have worried, it seemed. The large man looked concerned, apologetic even. His crumpled little nose and blood-stained lips made him seem even more sincere. "Son of the Almighty, Arenis, I'm sorry. I thought you were going to kill me. If it's any consolation, I probably would have just choked you out." She rubbed her head and moaned. "You did choke me out." Yeah. Again, sorry about that." "It's all right," she whispered with half-hearted smile. She offered him her hand, only to see him flinch. "I won't hurt you again. You know my name, tell me. What should I call a young gentleman such as yourself?" "Lieutenant Colonel Stephen McLaren," he said softly, placing his hand in hers. "I'm not that young." She thought she had known at least part of his name from when the vile warden had spoken, but apparently she was wrong. It seemed he wasn't called human after all. Of course, she wasn't called Night Beast either. She gently brought his hand to her lips and licked the back. She may have held on to it just a moment longer than courtesy allowed. Okay, thank you," Stephen said, withdrawing his hand. "Nice to meet you." "I am honored and delighted to make your acquaintance, my gentleman," said Arenis, pushing herself into a seated position against the wall. "Okay, so you're not going to kill me and I'm not going to kill you, right?" Stephen asked. Arenis felt genuinely offended. "I would never harm a gentleman," she said, literally turning her nose up at the notion. "Well, my head and nose seem to disagree," said Stephen. The imp never gave inflection in its voice, but she'd tell from his expression and the tone of Stephen's barks that he was making sport of her. She risked a playful slap at his tummy. It felt oddly firm for a man. He didn't seem to mind either. And there's this. Huh. Deeper than I thought. No wonder I'm still lightheaded. Stephen held up his right arm in front of her. Blood dripped from his elbow, freely landing warm and wet over her thighs. She had cut him deeply, no doubts about that. Without thinking, she grabbed his arm tightly to close the slash wound and tore the remnants of her wool chemise from her chest. It was little more than a broad necklace at that point anyway. Stephen didn't pull away as she bound it. "That's—" He opened and closed his hands a few times, seeming satisfied. "Pretty good." He turned to her and smiled. His mouth opened as if to say something, but silently gaped instead. She watched his eyes roam over her from her top to her bottom. "I didn't notice when we were fighting, but you're naked," he said. "Very naked." She glanced down, knowing her eyes couldn't tell her anything she didn't already know. Slowly, almost defiantly, she moved a hand to cover her groin. All this time she hadn't thought about it, but she'd been completely undressed. When they took her, she had awoken with her almost all of her clothing gone, a small fortune in leathers and furs. Gone were her jerkin, trousers and fur coat. She had been left with nothing but her undergarment. After a time, even that had been turned into bandages or simply washed to pieces, the last of which she had just given to this man without a second thought. She was as naked as any of the monsters here. She hadn't really been bothered by her nudity until this very moment. Somehow the presence of this odd man reminded her that the world hadn't been turned on its head, that civilization still reigned on the Almighty's earth, and she had at no point abrogated her need to comport herself in a proper and dignified manner. On the other hand, she was a tortured prisoner, lucky to be alive and in no position to be concerned with covering her shame when mere survival should be her biggest concern. Shame on him for pointing out something so trivial. "I have nothing to be ashamed of," she replied indignantly. "What's the matter? Have you never seen a woman before?" Well, sorry, I just meant that—" "Hold on." He unclasped his tunic's long, toothed fastener that ran from the top of its neck to the midsection and stepping out of it. It looked to be clean, save for the bloody section at the right arm, and made of remarkably fine construction. Underneath, he wore a set on soft-looking long underwear. "My gentleman, you needn't disrobe to your undergarments on my behalf," she hissed, reaching out to stop him. She was in far too feeble a condition to do much more than stall him. Had she been in perfect health, things might have been different. He shoved his tunic into her bosom. It smelled thickly of sweet blood, yes, but also sweat and musk. It was not entire unpleasant, but made her uncomfortably hungry. "Here, take it," said Stephen. He shrugged. "Or don't. But then you'll just distract me." The corners of her mouth began to creep up. She couldn't tell if he was joking or serious. Either way, it made her smile just a bit. She grimaced as she began pulling the garment on, agony racking her entire body with each movement. He took note of the trouble she was having and began to help her. To add to the indignity of losing in single combat to a man, and doing so wearing little more than what the Almighty gave her on the day she had been born, she was having to rely on him to dress her. Using one of her own claws, he cut open the hems at the legs of his garment, the better to fit her larger feet, Sliding it on past her buttocks, he helped her arms inside, fastened it up, and patted her side softly. "All set," he said. It could have been worse, she supposed. Pretending he was her personal servant made it a little easier, which she noted as she felt the fine fabric decorated with sigils and coats of arms was definitely not the case. This gentleman was nobody's servant. "Have you a title?" she asked him, admiring one of his sigils. "I thought I heard you mention one." Like yours, Dame Commander?" "Yes. From your inflection when we made introductions, I gathered you are Stephen of House McLaren. I thought Lieutenant Colonel might be a title." "The short answer is no, milady, but how about we talk about this later?" he said quietly. She followed his eyes as he looked from the speaking indentation in the wall and back to her. "I have plenty of questions about this place, and I'm sure you may have some questions for me. Perhaps once we get out of here." She gave a curt nod. Of course the warden was listening. Here, the expression was to be taken literally. The walls actually did have ears. "Can you see in here?" she asked. "None of the others, the monsters, can. You looked blind when you first got here, and now you can see the hole from where the warden speaks." "Well, I can't see too well at all," he said, "but when I got here I couldn't see a thing. My eyes needed time to adjust." He leaned close, his body hovering just over hers. "We are getting out of here," he whispered in her ear. "How?" she breathed into his much smaller one. "We wait. We'll figure the rest out," he said, "but I wouldn't worry." A soft sound came from the far wall, like metal on metal. Both her and Stephen turned to the noise. A small hatch, which she knew from experience to be an embrasure, had opened across the room. With all her remaining but not insignificant strength, she lunged for Stephen, grabbing him about the midsection and pulling him to the ground next to her. In one swift motion, she climbed atop him, lying flat, and did her best to cover as much of him as possible. "Don't move!" she hissed in his ear. Moments passes with not a single sound escaping between them or from anywhere else. "Why?" he whispered. She felt his hands move to her sides as if to move her off him, but they remained in place. Confused, she shifted her gaze from side to side, then slowly turned her head to look up and behind them. The hatch had closed. "Sorry, I thought they were going to loose arrows at us," she replied softly. She didn't immediately register that she should probably remove herself from the gentleman. She thought it as much his own fault. He should have said something, but didn't, for whatever reason. When she did roll off him, she felt a subtle but distinct loss. After so long with not a single kind interaction or touch from another living soul, it had actually felt nice. Stephen, whom she hadn't thought of as anything but her own countryman since she awoke, had just reminded her of what she'd been doing without. Not only that, but just having him with her in confinement as someone of a similar mind and goals, someone to work with, gave her hope. Though a man, he even made her feel safe and secure. "Don't do that again," he whispered. Chagrined, and more than a little hurt, she was about to apologize and explain herself when he continued. "You need to save your strength," he whispered. "You're still hurt from our fight, and I can probably take an arrow better than you anyway." Arenis's present condition had little to do with her match with Stephen, from which the pain, breathing issues, and dizziness had largely remitted, and everything to do with her virtually depleted and generally unsatisfactory food supply. She was not recovering her spent energy nearly as fast as she should have been, on top of the fact that she had been terribly weak to begin with. As for who should protect whom, he was still a man, and his arm could attest to the fact that his skin could rebuff arrows no better than hers. She was about to contest both his absurd notions when she noticed something that hadn't been there a moment before. "There is something on the step of that embrasure," she whispered in his ear, nodding in that direction. "The what?" Ree replied softly. The arrow slit. With the hatch, she clarified. He followed her gaze, a questioning finger pointing towards the small concave fixture. She nodded. Standing, he appeared nonchalant as he approached the object, palmed it, and returned to her side. Keeping it close between their chests, they examined it together. Roughly as long as the breadth of her hand, the object appeared to be a cylindrical container of some sort. Trying and opening the pressed-on lid, she extracted the contents. An unnaturally smooth piece of white vellum, as long as the container, and rolled neatly to fit inside. Unfurling it, she could see a set of simple illustrations like a child's hasty drawings. I don't get it, Stephen said. These are stick figures. 2 people. I can tell one is you and the other is me. What are these things? Arrows. The kind they use here, Arinis replied. She pointed to the 3rd drawing, where both their figures were struck like game, odd tubular arrows jutting from their backs. When they hit you, they put you to sleep except... She examined the 4th drawing, where their figures were on the ground with the arrows sticking in them. Then the 5th, where the arrows had been removed, but the figures were still on the ground. The 6th had 12 hash marks, time, she supposed, and in the 7th and final illustration their figures remained unmoved still. Except this time, they mean to kill us, she finished. Arinis tossed the vellum aside in disgust. Not that it mattered, but she wondered whether the message had been sent as a warning or a threat. We have to get out of here, she said, not even bothering to whisper, or hide somewhere. Yeah, definitely, agreed Stephen, looking to her cage. She had been afraid he'd get that idea. While it was most certainly true that she wasn't quite ready to introduce Stephen to her skeleton friends just yet, for fear that he might take it the wrong way, she had other more salient concerns. For one, while the bars might afford some small measure of protection, forcing their assailants to more carefully aim their shots, it was far from perfect. As much as she had moved around in there, they had always found a way to hit her before. But that alone did not give her pause. Some protection, even just to temporarily confound the enemy, beat nothing any night of the week. No, she wasn't going back into that tiny cage for one simple reason. She couldn't bring herself to go back in there, not after she had spent almighty knew how long alone inside that ossuary, with no time, no thoughts, nor company, hoping only for death to claim her and end the torment. Just thinking about it made her shake. I don't think it'll work, she said. We have to find something else. We'll find something else after we get some cover in there, he said, stepping inside the cage to examine it. She heard a cascade of crunching noises. That had to be Twinagard. Enfin, Stephen's foot had gone right through his chest, smushing some choice organs she'd been saving. What the shit, Arinis? She heard the man yell. Is this... Oh God, it's like a slaughterhouse in here. She mentally shrugged. She doubted his feet were very clean, but she would be dead long before she worked up the courage to eat more of Twin's foul-tasting, rotting entrails anyway. Don't be mad at me, she said, indignant. You're the one who wasn't looking where he was going and ruined my supper. What a posh gentleman you are. Can't even stand to see where your meat comes from. No, oh God, no, his voice barely above a whisper, his hand moving to cover his mouth and nose. He rolled Twin's head to the side, examining the skull cavity. One of his eyes fell out. Though she had chewed most of his face off, she had gone to great trouble to leave them in there, so he seemed more interested in what she had to say. I think these were intelligent people. They made you eat them. Of course not, she said. I could have starved, or played their little games, got some gruel, and as my reward got to take a little longer to starve to death. But those lunatics, killing their own slaves just to feed you. Slaves? She cocked her head to the side, confused. You mentioned something about that before. Maybe, but I don't think so. One of them was perfectly content to torture me all of his own accord. He seemed like he was rather enjoying himself, actually. The other two were his friends. I think they were in the employ of the warden. Well, that makes it even worse, Stephen said. I wonder why anyone would work for the captain if he was the kind of guy to... He paused, looking down at the remnants of the three monsters, then back to her. She grinned wide, flashing her pearly white teeth at him. She felt quite proud of her perfect smile. The corners of Stephen's mouth curled up in response. Ah, I see. The captain didn't kill these people, he said in a flat tone. Of course he didn't. Why would he do that? I did, she said. They're monsters. They took me and tortured me. They deserve no less. Right, he said, nodding his head, and you ate them. Want some? She asked, sarcasm and humour laid on thick. I could prepare some wonderful sausage for you out of that one's intestines, that one's innards, and the third one's back fat. Seasoned with some slime mould, and it's a supper fit for a queen. He appeared to be the opposite of amused. She sighed, seeing his revulsion had been genuine. I did it because I had to, my gentleman, not because I wanted to, she explained carefully. It's true that I don't entirely see this as cannibalism, which I know you're thinking because the thought crossed my mind too. The truth is, for whatever reason, I just can't seem to think of them as people, no matter what they say or how intelligent they seem. I cannot place myself as them, think as they would think, or feel ill for their illness. Do you understand? Yes, I understand. And what about me? He asked. It hurts me deeply that I hurt you without cause, she said, rubbing her chest. I feel for you as I would my own kin. And while I'm sure you would be absolutely delicious to eat, you are very clearly a person, so that would be cannibalism. Still, best to be on guard around me, she finished, playfully snapping her jaws at him. He walked to her and crouched down in front of her. Without warning, he gently tapped her on her nose. Just you try it, he said with what must have been a smirk. He leaned over her, scooping her into his arms. Embarrassed, she tried to help herself to her feet without him, but she was already standing with his assistance. No man from her people could have lifted her like that. Of course, no man she had ever seen was as large as him either. What are you doing? She asked. They had nowhere to go except... First, we get you to your feet, he said. Then we walk into the cage for some... No, 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 she said, pushing away from him. I don't care how big you are, you're not going to get me to go in there. Not now, not ever. He tried to urge her ever so gently into the cell. Come on, Arenis, we have to... No, she yelled into his face, her teeth narrowly missing everything from the furry patch above his left eye to the bottom of his chin. Shocked by what she had almost done, she looked away. I'm sorry. That isn't me. I just can't go in there. If that means I die standing here, then please just let it happen. Not a problem. I think I understand, said Stephen, and I'm sorry for trying to make you do something you didn't want to do. What if we climbed on top of the cage instead? The bars beneath us could still offer some protection. I could try that, she offered hopefully, but if we start and I don't want to anymore. Then we stop and find some other way to protect ourselves, he finished for her. She nodded with a smile. Help me over there, she said. She leaned heavily on the tall man, still uneasy on her feet. You're heavy. What do you eat, Lyd? Just kidding. I know what you eat, he joked with a smile, wrapping one arm around her waist and pulling her other over his opposite shoulder. His hand had tickled where he held her above her hip, causing her stomach to tense. He took notice. That's why you must spend a lot of time in the weight room. Have you thought about switching to cardio? She was about to ask what that was, followed by asking what the next step was in their escape, when a loud cracking and whining noise startled her. It had come from the voice indentation in the wall. Their time had just ran out. It was bound to happen sooner or later. She cursed the warden for the 1,000th time. The 7 hells did the translators reactivate? We'll find out how before I send you in there to ask them, the warden's voice screamed, seemingly to neither she nor Stephen, but somebody entirely unseen. Perhaps that person was in the adjacent room with the warden from whence he spoke. Night Beast, you will slash the human until he bleeds out immediately, or I will personally administer your bath time every single day, all day, until your skin is flayed from your bones. Wide-eyed, she felt the human shift beside her. I will not hurt this gentleman again, she yelled, unsteadily splaying her claws and rising on her pads to her full height, almost a head taller than Stephen. And I swear upon my honor, as Her Imperial Majesty's Dame Commander, that I will personally quarter your body and remove your head, in that order, with my bare feet. It was the first thing she had said to any of the takers, but she had let that particular secret go when she had introduced herself to Stephen. So be it, said the warden. 2 embrasures opened at opposite sides of the room, followed immediately by a pair of loud pops. Stephen heard the sounds and knew instantly that these dart guns were the poisoned arrows which Arenis had warned him of. At hearing the sound, he gave no thought to immediately pushing his companion away from him. She must have had the same idea, because when his hands met her shoulders, her hands met his chest. They didn't so much as shove each other away as explode apart. Adrenaline was a hell of a drug. It was far too late for either of them, he knew. He could feel his dart jabbing into his back, where he had landed on top of it, painfully forcing it deeper beneath his skin. He could see hers sticking out of her side, just at the level of what would be a kidney on a human. Against all odds, he saw her getting to her feet and staggering towards him. He marveled at her persistence and strength of will. Pulling himself to a seated position to yank the barbed dart from his back, he examined it carefully. A few millimeters of viscous blue liquid remained inside, but the rest had clearly been injected into his body. He wondered how much time he had. He wondered how much time Arenis had. She staggered to a dazed halt in front of him. Like a puppet with all her strings cut, she fell on top of him, pressing him to the deck. Stephen reached out to catch Arenis as she fell, though there was only so much he could do from his reclined position against her dense weight. He collapsed under her, his back slamming against the floor. Her head landed next to his, so close that her open mouth practically surrounded the side of his face, a hot, humid breath of air buffeting his senses. Earlier, he would have estimated her weight to be around 75 kilograms, but now, having collapsed while standing, she had felt at least twice that heavy. He couldn't move a muscle while pinned under her. He first tried to remove the dart from her side to get a better look at it, but found that he could not. The moment he tried to move, he felt her fighting against him, her arm pressing down into his. "Don Nova Nussel," she whispered, her long tongue tickling his ear. His translator did its best as she tried to speak with her mouth gaping and awkwardly pressed against his head. He got the general idea. "Clay dead. Tlust nei." Without a second thought, Stephen went limp and closed his eyes. He felt her chest against him, slowly inhaling, then exhaling a sigh in relief. They waited like that first for seconds, then minutes. He was about to take a short nap, made more difficult by her weight and high body temperature, when he heard the door to the cargo hold sliding open. He opened his eyes just the tiniest fraction to the bright light outside, enough to see several figures silhouetted. The first one, he could tell, was Ginter. The others, maybe 4, he had no idea beyond the fact that they looked to each be holding some kind of rifle. He readied himself to hold Arenis in place in case she decided to attack without warning. "Yes, it looks like the altered night beast serum I prepared has knocked them both out," He could hear the Centauroi doctor loudly saying from the doorway, "It's safe. You can move her into the cage. I'll wait right here." Stephen could feel Arenis salivating, the warm fluid starting to pool around his cheek and ear. He really wanted a Q-tip and maybe a small towel, and she really needed a breath mint or 20. One of Ginter's escorts shoved the doctor in her upper back with the butt of its rifle. "Not good enough, veterinarian," the crewman replied. "You know what the captain said. Your drugs, you get to go in first to make sure they're out cold. We'll wait right here." With another prod, he could see the doctor slowly trotting toward Arenis and himself, her hooves softly clapping against the deck plate with each step. He readied himself to hold Arenis tight if he had to. It would not help any of them to have her disembowel the good doctor. To his immense relief, he felt only his companion's hot breath and what might have been a growl from her stomach. Even as the doctor hovered over them, prodding them each in turn with a hoof, Arenis made no move. "Yes, my formulation has worked. They're definitely both out," said the doctor, stepping back. "You can move them now. I would hurry, though. The effects of the drug may not last long. This is the first time we've tried something like this on the human species." "Look at her. Not so tough now, is she?" asked one, stepping over to where they lay. Stephen could see Ginter by the doorway now, staring right at him and nodding her head up and down in an exaggerated motion. "No, she's nothing," said another crewman, crouching down beside them. He poked Arenis in the side. "Look at her. Tried to protect her boyfriend. Well, too bad, bitch. As soon as we get you back in your cage, he's getting a plasma bolt to the head." Those two were joined by two others, and still Arenis hadn't betrayed any sign of life beyond the rise and fall of her chest. He could feel her breathing faster and her heart pounding into his chest, though. Beyond that, however, she didn't move a muscle as each alien took one of her appendages in hand, tentacle, or other grasping organ. He began to wonder if perhaps something had gone wrong with a plan that everyone but him knew about, if she had been paralyzed, and if he would have to intervene. He had almost resolved to stop them from taking her into that cage when a head fell into his lap. He rolled to his feet, just as a creature that looked like a praying mantis, bred with a buffalo, fell to the deck, its head separated from its body by a good 2 meters now. Something with tentacles began to bring its rifle to bear on Arenis, only for Stephen to smoothly pry it away. He shot it 6 times, while Arenis landed just as many of her powerful kicks on the third crewman. It occurred to Stephen that she might have been going easy on him in their tussle. Very easy. With both hands, she held onto a being 1/2 meter taller than her, while her hind legs kicked up into its abdomen and then slashed downward. On the upswing, her legs operated like a kangaroo's might, stabbing into the alien with her dagger-like claws. On the downswing, her claws dug in deep, ripping and tearing, spilling blood, guts and bone with each motion. It was like being on the receiving end of a massive, intelligent and angry, reciprocating saw. When it looked like she was holding the being up by herself, all ability to stand on its own having departed with its life, she bit out its throat out for good measure. That only left the 4th crewman, who had backed himself away from the pair and made his way to the doorway. He held his rifle at the ready, taking turns aiming at Stephen then Arenis, as he carefully shuffle-stepped backwards. He was too scared to think rationally, Stephen realized, and had defaulted to trying to hold them in place. In moments he would come to his senses and decide whether to fully commit to shooting or to running. It was too late, though. The crewman had already made one fatal mistake: situational awareness. Arenis, for her part, had begun edging her way into the shadows and out of the swathe of light cast by the open doorway. In front of her, she held the remaining upper half of the last crewman she had killed, its entrails still spilling out, ostensibly as protection from the plasma rifle. It was equally as likely that she was just a nervous eater, as she continued to bite off chunks of her kill and swallow as she apprehensively eyed the gunman. Stephen had begun to consider dropping his weapon and stalling for time when, for the second time that day, a head hit him in the stomach. Or rather, most of a head. The blow hadn't been nearly as clean as one of Arenis's slashes. Ginter's hind legs landed with an echoing thud and bloody hoofprints. She then turned back around to face the pair. "Let's go!" she shouted. Stephen stepped around the fourth and final crewman, a crumpled and bloody heap thanks to Ginter's devastating mule kick. She wasn't the biggest creature on the ship, but that wasn't saying much when almost everyone else aboard stood 1/2 to double his height. He suspected that many of the inhabitants aboard were from low-gravity worlds, and that had something to do with it. Even after having spent so long in zero-G, this place still made him feel unnaturally light on his feet. At around 155 centimeters at her middle shoulders, Ginter's lower profile appeared similar to a full-grown buck reindeer. From her middle shoulders to her upper shoulders, she might have been an androgynous human of average adult size. Her head could be compared to that of a mule deer with a forehead, but with 6 tiny horns in place of antlers. She sported a short coat of fur over every millimeter of her body, with small, fine hairs as a lower layer and longer, coarse hairs as an upper layer. Her coloration ran the gamut from light brown to dark brown, interspersed with darker spots, and fading to tannish white on her chest, underside and rear. She, like everyone but he and Arenis, wore no clothes, nor hint of clothes. Instead, she opted to wear a very human-like backpack on her upper half and a pocketed harness on her lower. Unlike when he had noticed his predator friend with her torn undershirt, the doctor very clearly intended to be naked. It looked appropriate, actually, given the fur already providing her with sufficient coverage. He almost felt like one needed to have bare skin to even have the option of being in the nude. "Glad to see you again, Doctor," said Stephen, patting her lower shoulder as he hurried from the cargo hold into the adjoining corridor. It was then that he noticed Arenis had yet to follow. He turned back to find her crouched in the shadows of the open hold, still holding onto the corpse of her assailant. "I need a moment," she said. "It's too bright to see out there. My eyes will need time to adjust." "Okay, we'll wait then," Stephen replied with a nod. "We don't have that kind of time," said Ginter. "Maybe a minute or two to get to the command deck, tops. It's the only deck Antiktun won't expose to vacuum to kill us." Stephen helped his crouching companion to her feet. "I'll guide you until you can see," he said. "No, my gentleman, that will only slow you." "Climb on my back," called Ginter. "Now." "Are you sure, physician?" Arenis asked wearily, getting to her feet. "I did not think most creatures here could—" "Yes, move it." Arenis indicated her most recent meal. "May I bring my new friend?" "For the love of—" "Yes! Keep eating, damn it! But oof, we have to move!" Before the doctor had finished speaking, Arenis had leapt onto her lower horizontal back with her new friend still in hand. As they ran together, Stephen heard his companion talking to their rescuer. "Thank you for the instructions," said Arenis. "We didn't know what they meant at first, but we figured it out in short order." In truth, Stephen hadn't figured a damn thing out. Arenis must have known that there was nothing in the darts from the moment they hit. She had experience with them after all. As for them being filled with a lethal concoction, he supposed it hadn't taken her that long to figure out either. Without his companion, he would have spent a good 10 minutes looking for a way to counteract the non-existent poison. He should have known this was all just part of the doctor's plan. He had a pretty good guess that she had also been responsible for turning back on their translators. He hadn't even realized they'd been deactivated until the night beast started talking. "And thank you for not eating me," replied the doctor. "I wasn't sure you would know we were all on the same side." "I wanted to kill the guards first," Arenas said with a shrug, "and you made it clear that you had prepared the faulty sleep elixir. Why help us, though, aside from the obvious?" "There is no aside," said the other woman. "I am a slave here, and I would rather not be. As for the rest—" "She asked me for help when I was brought on board and examined," interrupted Stephen. "I knew immediately that you'd be able to help," Ginter said to him, before turning her attention to the woman riding on her back. "If you want, you can throw your leftovers off me. They're leaking onto my fur. I brought Stephen's meat rations for you. They're in my pack." "How considerate of you, physician," the other woman said, rooting through her pack, retrieving one of the entrees he'd set aside in his cell. It was beef brisket, and he was very jealous. She didn't, he noticed, drop her half-finished crewman. The doctor pointed to an open doorway ahead of them and to the left. "Here, up this ramp. Next level." A thought occurred to him. "Doc, we've got to stop by the cells amidships." "No, there isn't time, Stephen," she said. "Bullshit," he said. "We have to try. What about your oath, Doctor?" "To whom?" she huffed. Holding on to the doctor with her arms around her chest, Arenas leaned over the other woman's upper shoulders. "I would be regarded a stain on my order if we didn't free those people," she growled. "You are guilty of cowardice, alchemist, if you fail to aid them. Do you know what that means?" "It means we're going to free them," Ginter said with a sigh. "Idiots, both of you. This way." They started up the ramp and exited onto the third deck where the slave quarters were located. Stephen hadn't seen this part of the ship on his tour, but recognized a prison when he saw one. At the far end, a group of crewmen were already releasing the last of the slaves from their cells. It wasn't often that the enemy did his job for him, but he wouldn't look a gift horse in the mouth. He saw two of the crew pointing their rifles at the slaves, now pouring into the hallway. "Kill those three, and you all go free!" one of them cried. "Ah, that's why," mumbled Stephen. "They don't know who you are," said Ginter. "They won't know what you two are capable of. Please don't hurt them." "Me, I don't think we have much of a choice," said Stephen, charging behind the cover of a cell's doorframe. He aimed his rifle at one of the armed slavers and pulled the trigger. It fell, a large smoking hole appearing in his chest just before it toppled out of sight. With some consternation, he noted that killing the crewman had done nothing to quell the charging mob. He tried killing another one and succeeded just as easily. He briefly considered that his enemies were unusually slow. Even allowing for the normal dilating perception of time in combat, they were slow to move, slow to draw a bead on him, and slow to react. He heard a deafening sound, something between a lion's roar and what a Hollywood says a velociraptor sounded like. From the corner of his eye he saw the source. Arenas, standing at her full height on Ginter's lower back, a hand on the centauroid's head to stable herself. With her other, she tightly held her crewman meal by its dangling spinal column. Everyone paused in their tracks at the harsh war cry. All eyes were on the Dame Commander. Stephen took the opportunity to shoot another armed crewman in the stomach. "I am the Night Beast!" Arenas screamed, throwing the corpse hard. It soared down the hall with such force that when it hit the ground it burst into a splattering shower of vital fluids, bone and gore. "You will leave this place now, or I will kill every last one of you." Now that had routed the charging slave mob. "To the escape pods," Stephen added. "Go, that way." Arinis looked at him and cocked an eyebrow. He shrugged. So did she. Either she had no idea what an escape pod was, which was more than likely, or she didn't appreciate him ruining her moment, or both. The man made a mental note to send a distress signal for those pods, or release a nav buoy, or otherwise let someone know where they were. Arinis' ploy, that really wasn't a ploy at all, had worked perfectly. The mob of slaves and the handful of remaining crewmen had dispersed in every single direction, but the one that took them near him and his companions. He had to admit she was quite intimidating. In the dark of that hold, just after their rescue, while chewing on half a crewman, she was genuinely terrifying. In the abstract, she was a lot like the worst alien space horrors that cinema had to offer. It was more than just her bearing and behavior, as his arm could attest. And he had booped her snoot, daring her to eat him. Her vision must have adjusted sufficiently, and her strength returned, as she wasted no further time in jumping down from Ginter's back and joining him at the other woman's side. 2 more decks till we're safe, the Dietor said. The 3 of them ran at a dead sprint up the next spiraling ramp and into a long hallway, very similar to the one below. Along each side were rooms stacked with bunks and lockers. Personal effects were evident, along with what might have been game pieces or playing cards on tables. So far, they had been lucky. Or the crewmen had been lucky. He wasn't sure which at this point. None of them had been occupied. That changed when they made their way into a large open section. It looked like some sort of large multi-purpose room, with tables and chairs of all varieties in evidence, along with holo projectors, vidscreens, and quite a few other pieces of equipment whose function he could only just guess at. The room looked like it could have been used for anything from dining to entertainment to relaxing to exercising to just about anything else a crewman a long way from home might want. At the moment, there sat 3 groups of around a half-dozen crewmen each, lounging on what looked like old Roman clini. He might have let them live, had they not moved a muscle, but no. Not after he noticed they were being served and serviced by at least a dozen slaves. A calmness came over him, and he gave a mental shrug. Maybe Arinis was right. It certainly didn't take much for him to stop seeing these creatures as people. He raised his rifle to a chorus of wide-eyed shouts, whoops, and screams from all present. They began preparing to scatter like roaches. "No one move!" he bellowed, and everyone in the room froze in place. He scanned the room, ready to punch neat little superheated holes in anyone who even looked like they might try to go for their weapons or resist. By all rights, he should have started shooting well before he opened his mouth. That would have been the tactically sound approach. But no, he had something better in mind for this scum. He turned to the NASA jumpsuit-clad woman at his side. She was at least as angry as he was at this point, maybe more so, chivalry being what it was. He had an idea not to use Arinis so much as harness her into providing something so much more deserving than a simple death. "My lady," he said, "my delicate masculine sensibilities have been gravely offended. Would you mind killing everyone who is presently sitting on one of those chairs?" "Gladly, my gentleman," she replied with a snarl. He could see her preparing to pounce in the corner of his eye when one of the slavers, looking from Stephen to Arinis and back again, decided to beg for his life. Apparently, it had heard what he had said. "Wait!" the creature shouted. Pushing a slave off its lap, he stood and addressed Arinis. "I'm male too, and you wouldn't hurt an unarmed man, would you?" "I might," she responded. Stephen could tell she was genuinely mulling it over. He knew she was used to killing in the heat of battle or in desperation, but this was something different, even if deserved. Add to that the fairly obvious fact that her society, and more than likely her entire species, was deeply matriarchal, and these sorts of executions pose somewhat of a challenge to her culture and training. "Fine," said Stephen, pointing his rifle at the creature's head. "I'll do it." "Single combat!" the being shouted, his hands moving to cover his face from the inevitable plasma bolt. "I demand to face my attacker in single combat. No weapons. Me and him." He heard Arenes let a small puff of air escape her lips. He doubted there was much she could say to that. Would she think less of him if he just shot this slaver? Probably. On the other hand, the thing looked like something out of a horror film on stilts. He couldn't even begin to count the number of legs. His choices were either to try and impress a violent alien super-predator by fighting a living nightmare twice his height, or to chicken out and shoot the damn thing. Ginter must have known his hesitation meant that he was actually considering doing anything other than putting a hole in the crewman's thorax from a safe distance. "Don't be stupid, you stupid," she said. "We don't have time for this. Just shoot them all and let's go." Stephen handed his rifle to the doctor. "If anyone tries to interfere or make a run for it, then you use this," he said. She took the weapon and held it deftly. Stephen stepped to Arenes and pulled the young woman in for a hug. He felt her chest expand and contract in a sigh. "Be safe," she whispered. He leaned in, giving her cheek a quick little lick. "For luck," he said. For a moment, she seemed stunned, not knowing what to say. She appeared to shrug. As if to stretch, she first brought herself up to her full height on the very pads of her feet, standing maybe 10 centimeters taller than Stephen, then lowered herself down to his eye level. Leaning in, she held him tight and licked him firmly and square across the lips. "For luck," she said, letting him go. Stephen turned to face the nightmare spider-crab crewman and started walking. "You can do it, my gentleman," called Arenes, as Stephen stalked his way up to the massive monstrosity. "I believe in you." "Idiots. The both of you." "Such unnecessary drama," she said, shaking her head in disgust. "Getting yourselves worked up over nothing when we should be heading for the command deck. Stephen's just going to tear him in half anyway." He heard both of his companions' votes of confidence and felt his chest swell with pride. He would need every bit of it. He wasn't sure this was a good idea. He should just grab Arenes and run, but no, here he was, risking everyone's life because it was supposedly the right thing to do. At least all the slaves were escaping, so it was a win at the end of the day. As he approached the looming spider-crab beast, he began considering his plan of attack. Should he make a grab for one of the legs or try to dodge them? Should he keep his distance and remain mobile, or close the distance and grapple? Was the thing venomous? How strong was it? How fast was it? "Come at me, creature," said the spider-crab crewman. "Class 12, ha! Suck my ovipositor." "Hey, wait a minute," said Stephen. "Ovipositor, you're not a—" The thing swiped for Stephen with a long pincer, and the man had an answer to the question of speed. Not very fast at all. He dodged easily, lunged forward beneath the creature so its central body loomed above him, and jumped into an uppercut. That's when the world went dark as it slammed down onto him. With the multi-limbed monster now pressing down, blocking his senses, and both of them sprawled out on the deck together, a bout of hysterical arachnophobia struck Stephen. He lashed out with both hands and feet, swinging madly as he tried to force the spindly crewman off him. He barely registered that everything around him had begun to get warm and slimy, and his opponent had indeed started its retreat as he had hoped, albeit one piece at a time. Finally, he managed to find his footing beneath him, staggering and gasping. "Where is it?" he demanded of no one in particular. "All around you, you lunatic," said the doctor. "Honestly, you're the most deadly being in the known universe that isn't another human, whether you want to admit it to yourself or not. You could have just slapped it dead." Stephen was soaked from head to toe in alien gore from a being that had been talking to him not 5 seconds ago. His thermal underwear had offered approximately zero protection from alien guts. Looking down at his feet, he could see that, if anything, the doctor had understated his abilities. The spider thing wasn't torn in half so much as lumped into an odd collection of piles. He felt like throwing up. "He tried his best," scolded Arenis. "These monsters can be scary. There's no shame in that." Stephen wiped blood and chitin fragments from his eyes. He noticed Ginter cradling his rifle expertly. Thinking perhaps having more weapons was better than not, he reached for one that had been next to where Spider-Crab had been lounging. "Fuck this. No more single combat. Keep that gun, Doc. Things might get hairy." Just as he lighted the lightweight weapon into hands, the room went mad. Apparently, telling the crewmen he and his friend were going to kill them all was a great way to make sure none of them stayed put long enough for him to actually make that happen. He sighed internally. He hadn't wanted to take prisoners, certainly not after seeing how they used their slaves. But he also wanted to put a good face on humanity after all this mess came to light. That meant he probably shouldn't kill those who were willing to surrender. As for those opting to flee, though a little distasteful, shooting a retreating combatant in the back wasn't a war crime. They could be reasonably expected to return to the fight otherwise, more likely with a greater tactical advantage. "Slavers! You run, you die!" he shouted at the top of his lungs. "You surrender, you live!" It went without saying that if they fought back, they would probably also die. "Ari, take the ones running. I'll shoot the ones going for weapons," he called, hoping she would remember which ones were slaves and which ones were slavers. "Ginter, help me lay down some cover fire. Don't shoot near our girl." Arenis, for her part, didn't even notice as Stephen cut down with hot plasma the ones trying to shoot at her. She simply kept slicing into the bodies, crowding the far doorway. In his adrenaline-fueled, hyper-aware state, he wondered why on earth the most of the ones behind cover would risk being gunned down by Ginter and himself in order to shoot at Arenis, who was busily fixated on tearing her way through those trying to flee. He could probably guess. She was meters from those hunkered down, far closer to them than Stephen, and while he and Ginter were just another pair of combatants, she was so much more. Knee-deep in the remains of the fleeing crewmen, already down to the last few, she seemed like a dark, shifting mass of terror made of lightning-quick teeth and claws, a roaring demon from nightmares made real. To them, Stephen was just a small mortal with a gun, but her, she was the dark angel of death ascended from the depths of hell itself. It irked Stephen that they thought so little of him as he shot yet another through the side of the head. It also scared him a little. If he couldn't pin these guys down because they couldn't be bothered to pay attention to the man shooting a weapon at them, it put his partner at serious risk. In what was at this point a truly unsurprising amount of time, the entire matter became moot. After decapitating the last of the escaping crewmen, Arenis spared not a single instant before leaping on the first of a trio of slavers who had neither attempted to flee, surrender, nor been shot by Stephen. In the light gravity, the young woman launched like a rocket from the doorway, giving the lieutenant colonel and the doctor precious little notice to shift their fire away so as not to commit fratricide. In as many seconds, Arenis had leapt to each of the three crewmen, having neatly sliced through their largest and mostly centered areas of mass, in one's case practically bisecting him, or her, all the way through. Stephen guessed that at this point, her speed wasn't so much due to the trained efficiency of a killer, but the fact that she had stopped taking the time to eat. She probably had her fill and just wasn't hungry anymore, judging by the slight bulge of her previously lean tummy, evident even beneath his flight suit. "Fine. Good. We're done here," said Ginter, trotting to the doorway at the end of the room, Stephen in tow. She pointed back the way they had come and spoke loudly. "Escape pods are that way. If you are alive, you should consider yourself free to get the hell off this ship before you die with the rest of—" Shit! Let's get going. Stephen had felt the slight and disquieting breeze of cold air in a spaceship. A moment later he heard the hissing. He broke into a run, heading for the last ramp that would take them to the command deck, his accomplices just behind. He must have been holding out hope that the firefight would have stopped us. Not enough time. Not enough time. Ginter, can we block these vents? No, said the doctor, not all of them. The air will be long gone before we finish sealing the vents on this deck, let alone every deck. And we'd need to do that because the captain will have locked every door open as sure as he'd have locked the command deck closed. As if he needed some proof of her words, the trio rounded the curving ramp only to run face first into a completely sealed doorway. Seeing no way to lift or pry the smooth white surface, and nothing in the way of a handle or anything else to grab hold of, Stephen settled for banging on it. "What about we just head to one of the escape pods?" he asked. "What are the chances we survive?" Ginter made a gesture that Stephen's translator said meant negative. "Even if we made it there without suffocating," she said quickly, "we can't leave the slavers in command of the harvester. They'll just collect the floating pods and tow them to their home system, or shoot them out of the void. Whichever." "Fine, we bust the door." "Stephen," said Ginter, grabbing his shoulder and rubbing a thumb over his collarbone, "you're strong, but this is a waste of time. We need a better plan. It's an interior spaceship door. It only needs to withstand 15 psi, 20 tops. And it's not just me doing the kicking," he said, returning the gesture by pressing his hand into her withers and rubbing his thumb over the muscles there. "You're stronger than you know, Ginter. You kicked someone's head off just a pair of minutes ago and carried Arines like a warhorse riding into battle. I think between all three of us we can do this." She looked livid, almost like he had offended her. "Damn you to hell, Stephen, we will talk about that later, but that does not mean we can do this." "Time is running out," shouted Arines, grabbing the doctor by the head and turning the other woman to face her. She stared daggers into her eyes. "You will help us now, like an ancestor's damned beast of burden, and kick down that door, or I will tear your heart out and let your soul rot adrift amongst open stars for all eternity." Stephen placed a gentle hand on the back of the enraged woman's neck and coaxed her to one side of the door, pointing at it. Arines nodded. He stood in the middle of the doorway before nodding to Ginter. "You're on that side, where I think it probably latches." "I can't aim with two hooves," she said. "Hitting that man in the head was just a lucky shot." "Then use one," he said. "Ready? Now." Stephen and Arines fell flat on their faces, each trying to grab hold of the other to brace their fall. They both ended up on the ground in an ungainly tangle of each other's limbs, with Stephen wondering just what in the hell had happened. Neither of their kicks had made contact with anything, he was sure of it. Looking around, the man realized they were both lying on the floor of the command deck, just across the entranceway they had been on the opposite side of an instat ago. The door itself was nowhere to be seen, leaving him to conclude that it had slid into a recess and admitted them. Ginter, having the benefit of owning a total of 4 legs and only using one to kick, remained standing. She gave them the equivalent of a shrug, as he and Arines delicately untangled themselves from each other and got to their feet. "You were going to break down the door anyway," called the captain. Even Stephen could tell from the man's natural voice that he had to be somewhere on the expansive deck, as opposed to speaking from a distant location via intercom. He could tell the slaver had to be. "Don't shoot, I'm unarmed," said the captain, stepping out from behind one of the command consoles. Stephen trained his weapon on the man, as did Ginter. The captain held his hands spread wide apart, empty palms facing forward. Even if that had been the universal gesture for "fuck you," Stephen could still tell the man held nothing at all, dangerous or otherwise. Behind the man, another slaver whom Stephen recognized, Mashi, the executive officer, made his way out from hiding. His tentacles spread wide. He too held nothing in his grasping appendages. "You're surrendering?" Stephen asked in disbelief. "Just like that?" The captain made the equivalent of a shrug. "You literally tore through my entire crew." "Yes. I'm sorry, but I think this creature is tricking us," said Arenis, bouncing gently on her toes. Stephen wondered what that meant. Nervousness, indecision. In another context, it might have been cute. "If I wanted to kill you all," Anticton said, "I would have simply opened fire as soon as I opened the hatch, not set up some elaborate trap." "I don't like this either, Arenis." Stephen saw nothing out of the ordinary, but that could mean nothing. "I am begging you," said the captain. "Spare us. We mean you no further harm. This ship is yours now, Captain Human. This is no trick, just a conclusion that being at your mercy will keep us alive longer than shooting at you will. You killed a fully armed crew. You had inside help from a traitorous doctor. You could tear this ship apart with your bare hands, and that is no hyperbole. History has shown that even one Deathworlder aboard a starship will kill everyone, let alone 3. I am merely bowing to the odds." Arenis growled. Stephen could tell she didn't like this turn of developments. After what she had been through, the temptation to gut him must be overwhelming, though equally conflicting with her sense of honor. Of course, he wouldn't dream of stopping her if she simply lost control. The lieutenant colonel held his weapon a little tighter, but pointed down to the ground. Arenis had still not made her move, the earlier threats to personally disembowel him and devour his flesh notwithstanding. Ginta, he noticed, had curiously raised her weapon to point at the captain, and she had just flipped the safety off. "Whoa!" He slapped his hand against the barrel of her rifle, pushing it to the side. It took a surprising amount of force to get her point of aim shifted away from the captain. The doctor began to struggle against Stephen, but made little headway until she began sidestepping into him with her haunches, simply pushing him aside with her bulk. Ginta made a whining, plaintive noise as she continued to try her best to wrestle the weapon back on target. "He knows, Stephen, he must die." Keeping an eye on Anticton and Mashi, the lieutenant colonel opted to stop pushing the rifle away and instead simply pulled it free from her grasp and threw it to the side. The 2 slavers had not made a move for any concealed weapons or tried to activate any devices or explosives. That had been their best opportunity to spring a trap, and they hadn't done anything. Perhaps he should give them the benefit of the doubt. At the moment, however, he wanted to know just what the hell had gotten into the doctor. And so did Arenis. "Physician," she asked, "I agree the warden deserves death, but he is surrendering. To my people, and I think to Stephen's as well, it is considered rude to kill someone in such a circumstance. Only an appointed magistrate or a lady may pronounce his death now," said Arenis. She gave Stephen a conspiratorial eye, or a ship's captain. "Though I'm curious, what does he know exactly that you believe he must die for?" Ginta grunted. Stephen wanted to know the answer to that question as well. He thought back to a few minutes ago, just before he and Arenis had less than gracefully made their entrance onto the command deck. Though he hadn't really known her very long at all, that was only other time he had seen Ginta nearly this upset. Almost like a switch had been flipped. It had happened just after he had mentioned how strong she was. "Deathworlders," Stephen said to Anticton. "You called the US Deathworlders. You also said it before, just after you locked me in that room with Arenis. Is that something significant? A word for races that are stronger than the wet tissue paper the rest of you seem to be made of?" "Exactly," said Anticton. "It's a compliment, really. We would all love to be able to tear someone's head off as easily as opening a beverage, wouldn't we?" Ginter doesn't seem to like being called that, said Stephen. A spy and a traitor. The former captain gave a shrug equivalent. Her type doesn't like the truth. Doesn't like being found out. What do you mean? Asked Stephen. The captain gave a knowing smirk. Ask her. If she doesn't want to come clean. I'm asking you, Stephen growled. Ginter looked like she might charge the man. Arinis kept a hand on the other woman's back, but Stephen had serious reservations about how much good that would do beyond giving Arinis a very short ride to the middle of a bloodbath. Anticton made a gesture equivalent to rolling his eyes. The veterinarian isn't from Vree, a Class 3 world. She probably isn't even Shalkoth. She's from a death world like you and Lady Arinis of Karamast. Could also be some kind of engineered soldier, but I doubt it. She hardly seems the type. So what? Said Stephen. Is this some kind of obscure space politics? What does it matter what world she's from? I don't understand. Of course you don't, whispered the doctor. And that's why I like you. And Arinis. It doesn't matter to you and your kind. But to the rest of the galaxy, it does. We, the three of us, are from worlds that aren't supposed to harbor sapients. If you ask them, we pose a serious risk to all other life in the galaxy. That is how you are able to tear that Zertik to pieces. How Arinis was able to kill an entire ship with her bare hands. And it was how I was able to carry her on my back and kick that man's head off. That's what gave me away, I imagine. Why would you want to hide that? Stephen asked. It seems like something I would want to let other people know about me. If they knew that, they might not have even taken you into slavery. Even as he said it, he realized an obvious conclusion. She wanted to be taken. Or at least it was better than some alternative she faced. Because, Stephen, the powers that be in this galaxy, as much as they don't like to admit that Deathworlders even exist, have a policy to address us, should they ever find us. 100% quarantine until the race reaches independent extrasolar flight. Then it's extermination, probably by something as simple as lobbing a few asteroids our way. There is evidence that it has happened before. Conspiracy theories. Why have plans to destroy species that don't even exist? Yelled the former captain. You're not going to listen to that whack job, are you? As opposed to an abusive slave trader pleading for his life, asked Arinis. Why bother waiting for us to become spacefaring? Asked Stephen, entertaining her suggestion. Because most races, Deathworlder or not, end up destroying themselves anyway. It's just a byproduct civilization. All life is competitive, carnivorous or not. Radiological weapons, heat death, pollution, engineered disease, all have killed worlds. Aeons ago, a civilization even created vast satellite swarms around their sun to produce power, with each political faction producing and controlling their own set. They ended up weaponizing them. They're still active today, and the planet is mostly an accretion disk now. Suicide is more convenient than murder, even on a planetary scale. And your people are spacefaring? Asked Stephen. Yes, and yours are too now, said Ginter. That gave him pause. Though it was a natural instinct, he was suddenly very glad he hadn't provided any information to the slavers. How did the captain not know who or what you were? Asked Arinis. He certainly thought I was dangerous, and one can surmise that it did not take him long at all to reach the same conclusion for Stephen. How were able to hide? And if you were not unawares of this greater community of demons and their machinations concerning our kind, why did you allow them to take you? Ginter huffed. Stephen's translator told him that was a sigh. I might as well tell you in front of them. The captain knows enough now that the wrong people can piece together the rest if he starts talking. I am a Shalkoth, and not engineered either. Not artificially, anyway. You colonized a death world, interrupted the captain. "Shut your face before I remove it," Arenas shouted back. "When Shalkoths were first leaving Vree millennia ago, we did so in corporate-sponsored generation ships. A few natural disasters, wars, man-made catastrophes, and time meant that more than a few were lost to the homeworld. Garatkoth, my planet, is almost as deadly as either of your worlds. We knew of the gravity, atmosphere and weather before we left Vree, so we had generations to accommodate. But our history tells us that most were lost in the years after landfall. Maybe up 9 out of every 10 people. But we persevered, and I am a descendant of that lineage." She shook her head slowly, looking to the ground. When she spoke again, it was barely a whisper, a hiss of disgust through clenched teeth. "Imagine our surprise when we finally began exploring the stars again, when our investigations on other worlds, dead worlds, informed us that our dedication to survival had marked us for extermination. Imagine my surprise when one of our farming outposts was raided by slavers, the fishermen of this galactic economy. I played the Vrian rather than expose my civilization to death." She gestured to the former captain. "That man traded a pair of sublight engines to get me. I would have lived like that, forever a pathetic Vrian slave if I had to, if I couldn't find a way to escape. Then you came. Then they found you, Stephen. Your race had no more time. I couldn't let them do to you what we had seen them do to other worlds." "That's why you helped me," said Stephen. "Why you told me what these guys were about back when I was first brought aboard." "Thank you. And that's why I would do anything to ensure knowledge of my people's existence doesn't fall into the wrong hands. Just knowing that a Shalkoth death world exists would be enough to send people looking for it," she said. "I have to admit, I was a bit disappointed in you, Stephen." "What? Why?" he asked. "You're too nice," she said. "I was kind of expecting you to begin a rampage with me a lot sooner and not get tricked into the cargo hold. For the sake of your people, I needed you to make a move before we made landfall at a Slava outpost, before anyone else might see what you could do and draw some conclusion." I was feeling him out. I was going to escape, but I'm not going to start a fight just on the word of one person, especially when these guys are so big. And Stephen paused, scratching the side of his face. "Yeah, I think I just figured out where you're going with this." "What?" asked Arenas. "I feel I'm missing something important." "She instigated this, you dumb beast," said Antiktun, gesturing to the Centaurioid. "She told me Stephen was a Deathworlder, or pointed me in the right direction, which amounts to the same thing. She wanted me to try to kill him. You two should feel betrayed. So you put the gentleman in the dungeon with me and opened my cell. I suppose I should thank you," said Arenas with a slight bow at the waist. "As much as I hate being used, you made the right call," said Stephen. "I'm not sure I would have attempted my escape in time. Even if they spaced me then and there, it was the right call." "Spaced?" asked Arenas. Stephen had forgotten that many of these concepts were totally new to the young woman, although she was a deceptively quick learner. "Left my body adrift amongst the stars," he clarified. "And how exactly is that a good decision?" Arenas asked Ginter with a slight growl and an accusatory stare. "No ship of his own, no body, no evidence at all. Barely an inkling of where he might have come from," said the doctor. "It would have bought his race time. It's better than Stephen waiting until it's too late to make his move, and it was also the least plausible outcome. Stephen wouldn't be dumb enough to walk into an airlock, and any weapon that won't put a hole right through this ship's hull won't permanently injure us. I thought Stephen fighting his way to control of the ship was a very good bet. Getting himself locked in a room with what I took for a vicious predator. No offense, Arenas." "None taken, physician," said the other woman. "Was very much not part of my plan. I had to improvise, so kudos to you for keeping me on my feet, former Captain Anticton. So, Stephen, could I please have a weapon so I can kill this pile of shit? Stephen spared a glance back to the weapon he had thrown, form the woman's arms, then back to the slavers. He licked his lips, mulling it over. Ah, well, that would be one way to handle this situation, but— No, Captain, she said, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder, rubbing his collarbone with the thumb again. It's the only way. It's the only way to keep us, our kind, safe from the galaxy. You must understand that. He felt a strong discomfort creeping up on him between this woman's touch, the closeness of her imposing bulk, and the strength he had seen in those legs. He began a mental rundown of whether or not it was a good idea to punch a rampaging horse. It's possible to imprison them on one of our worlds, Stephen said. We can inform our peoples of the situation and let them handle it. The abductions occurred in their territory. They have jurisdiction. So do you, Captain, she whispered. Ginter's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on his shoulder. We vote, physician, said Arinis. Then we will abide by the captain's decision. Ginter turned to the other woman, appearing annoyed. Fine, she said. I vote they stand before a magistrate, said Arinis. I vote I kill them, said Ginter. And I vote they also stand trial, said Stephen. So be it, hissed the doctor. Stephen handed his weapon to Arinis before marching over to the pair of slavers, grabbing them each by an appendage. They were surprisingly soft. Ship? Stephen asked, looking to one of the speakers embedded in the bulkheads. He had seen the other slavers doing much the same thing before the escape. Do you respond to me now? Yes, Stephen. You are the captain, came a digitized reply in English. The former captain ceded command to you at 4681.93.62.13 in the afternoon. He dragged the pair to the command deck's airlock and slapped the control for the inner hatch. The former captain began to protest. What are you? He shoved them roughly inside and slapped the control again to shut the door. Ginter looked pleasantly surprised. She had the wrong idea. He just didn't want them to have any clue where they were going until they got there. It was the space equivalent of tossing them in the trunk of a ground car, he imagined. Ship. Do not open the inner or outer door to this airlock for anyone but me, he said. Now, can you find the location of my homeworld using the location you found me, the distance I traveled, if provided, and the direction I was traveling relative to the galactic center? Yes, but that will not be necessary, said the ship. The I have determined you are from RGT 9873A3, an uninhabitable class 12 Deathworld. All right, set course for— Wait, Ginter said. I change my vote. What? It's too late, said Stephen, and it wouldn't matter anyway. Yes, it does, and no, it's not, she quickly replied, pointing to Arinis. I also want to see them before a magistrate. On her world. Stephen stared at her for a moment, then shrugged. Justice is justice. They have claim too, don't they? Both Ginter and Arinis nodded. Ship, do you know where Arinis's home is? Of course, came the reply. Good. Set course and go, he said, pointing at the view screen. As space warped outside the ship, Arinis moved to stand close. He put an arm around her and felt very gratified when she returned the gesture, kneading her hand into his side. I'm finally going home, she whispered to him. Yeah, he whispered back, placing a kiss on the side of her head. He wasn't sure she knew what the gesture meant, but she sure didn't mind. It's our version of affectionate licking, he said. Thank you, Stephen, she replied, kissing his cheek in return. Hey, Arinis, he whispered. Yeah, she whispered back. What's the penalty for kidnapping one of Her Imperial Majesty's Dame Commanders? He asked. Oh, if they're found guilty, death, she replied. Probably torture first, then definitely a painful death. Lots of torture, though. He glanced behind him long enough to see Ginter smirking. Stephen felt something large and painful land on his back, knocking the air out of him. It felt like a piece of furniture, or a stack of books, or more likely, a wild animal, and it kept bouncing against his spine and ribs, up and down, up and down. Any attempt to move from his prone position brought pain, as sharp claws dug into his skin and fingers curled around his biceps. "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy, get up, get up, get up!" "Claws off the comforter," he growled at the animal. "You know that." He felt the sharp points at the back of his thighs relent, replaced by bony knees, but the bouncing wouldn't cease, and neither did the prying fingers at his arms. He tried his best to ignore the disturbance, burying his face deeper under his pillow, pulling it tight around his head, but that had been a mistake. It gave the beast something to attack, a weakness to exploit. She began prying at his fingers and pulling at the pillow, all while still bouncing up and down on his back, trying to beat the life out of him. "Daddy, Daddy, stop playing. It's time to get up." The beast pressed her face to his jaw, prying his pillow up just enough to expose one of his ears. She whispered, "I have a surprise for you." He grunted. Based on the smell alone, he could guess what it was. This would call for drastic measures. He reached slowly to the left, hand sliding carefully between the sheets so as not to arouse suspicion. He would wake the beast's mother. Making contact with the warm body, he shook the creature. She grunted back, "No." He pleaded with the mother of the beast. "Babe, no, sleep. Your daughter." The die had been cast. He would make one last attempt to defeat the beast before all was lost. He rolled over towards the mother of the beast. "Way!" Sarah landed with a flump on top of her mother. It had worked. The battle over, Stephen would return to the life of peace he had built for himself since last night in this, his king-sized bed kingdom. Fluffy bear, your daughter wanted you. I think I heard her say she has a surprise. Probably because she didn't forget what day it was," said the mother of the beast, his wife. Deftly, Arenis yanked his only protection, his pillow, from his head. She grabbed his beard and turned him to face her, drawing a long lick across his lips before tearing the blankets off of him. All hope was lost. "Of course I didn't forget that it's our 10-year anniversary," he said, returning the lick witch a kiss. He had got her a gold and Irentian pearl necklace, which he would surprise her with at dinner that evening. He pushed himself to a seated position in the bed, his back against the headboard, with Arenis doing the same. "If you're going to bring your father a surprise," said his wife, "go get your brother. I think he has one for me." "But, Mum, he can't see in the dark," complained Sarah. "Neither can I," said Stephen. "Go get your sunglasses, then turn on the lights so the men of the house can see what's going on. It won't be much of a surprise if I can't see it, right?" "Fine," the little girl huffed. When she had cleared the room, Stephen turned to Arenis. "You had something to do with this, didn't you?" "Maybe I did, my fluffy bear," she said as coyly as she could manage. She must have been watching a lot of vids. She was getting better. "The kids wanted to do something for us this year. You always tell them that damn story of how you, me, and Aunt Ginter all met. Can you blame them for getting excited?" "No. But does it have to be so early in the morning?" he asked, just as the lights came on. Though it took him a moment to adjust to the light, he noticed Arenis sporting the pair of reflective gold-hued aviators she kept on the nightstand. "Well, that depends on the surprise," she replied cryptically. "Some surprises are best enjoyed in the morning." She nodded to the doorway of their bedroom. There stood a young boy, not more than 8 years of age, pale skin and dark hair, just like his father. Unlike his mother, his eyes did not glow at night, but instead appeared as green as grass. "Hey, kiddo, what you got for me?" Stephen asked. "Nothing, father." "This is for Lady of the Manor," said the boy, carrying what looked like a pile of raw steaks from 6 different animals and as many worlds. He presented the tray to his mother. After she took it onto her lap, she pulled him close and kissed his cheek and ruffled his hair. "Thank you, Algernon," the boy's mother said. "Such a dignified young gentleman you are." The boy bowed, looking very proud of himself. "Dad!" Stephen turned to the sound, just as a miniature night beast, wearing lime green shorts, a loose rainbow-covered hoodie, and hot pink sunglasses bounded through the bedroom door, claws scrabbling over the hardwood, digging in just long enough to give a good launch for a pounce onto her father. Long black hair, though tied into a ponytail, found its way into his face. Something hard and warm was forced into his chest. "One more thing," said Sarah, excitedly hurrying off her father, her claws still managing to find his calves and the comforter in the process. "No peeking," she called back. Stephen shook his head and looked down at what she had presented him. It was the large plastic cutting board from the kitchen with a metal serving tray cover over most of it. Something warm was underneath. He reached to lift it. "No peeking, my gentleman," said Arenis. "The lady says no peeking, sir," echoed Algernon. He stuck his tongue out at his son. The boy stuck his own tongue back at him and jammed index fingers up both his nostrils for good measure. Stephen was about to tell him how he might accidentally stab his brains that way when his daughter tried to kill him for what must have been the 3rd time that morning. "Ooh, you're getting big, honey," he said, rubbing the girl's back. "No, you're getting small," she replied, tossing bottles of chocolate syrup, honey, strawberry syrup, and maple syrup into his lap. "Thanks, kiddo," he said. "Now what's this surprise?" She lifted the cover off the cutting board. "Pancakes,"